it's probably like late 93 or early, very, very, very early 94. People start like coming in and asking if we have magic. Some guy comes, this big guy, and he's like, do you have, Magic the Gathering? I'm like, no. And the guy kind of just picks me up by like my lapels and like kind of like shakes me. Not because he's mad at me, but like that he's just upset. He's like, why can't I find this fucking game? Sort of stomps off. And I was like, Glenn, we need to order Magic the Gathering. Right? we can't get any. All of this is sort of somewhere between the release of Beta and Unlimited in New York.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the new year. This week, we've got the legendary Brian David Marshall. Brian, or BDM, is full of stories like the one you just listened to. He was an absolutely incredible guest, and we spanned the gamut. We talked about everything that covered Brian's career, whether it was the Magic stuff, the coverage, the years on the road, the growing up with Magic at neutral ground, but also this is kind of an ode to Brian's comic book career. Brian's a lifelong comics fan, and he certainly has lived a lot of his life through comics and Magic. Along the way, Brian gives a lot of interesting comments about Magic now versus Magic then, and Magic into the future. Incredibly honored to have this conversation with Brian. Brian is just wonderful, lovely to talk to. I've also included timestamps with this episode, so you feel free to jump around and listen to the topics that you would like. But if you can commit 2.5 hours to listening to the legendary BDM, I highly recommend it. An absolute joy to talk to. Without further ado, Brian David Marshall. Brian, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, James. I'm glad we get a chance to do this. We've talked about it for a little while.
I'm so excited. To be honest, I woke up 2 hours earlier than I usually do because I was like, while I was sleeping, I think my brain was functioning, and I was thinking about all the questions I'm going to ask Brian. And I was just like trying to figure things out, but it's so hard because you have such a background of experience, just a wealth of like history and experience. Like, has anyone ever been like starstruck just talking to you, or like super nervous talking to you about Magic?
I mean, apparently, I've heard people tell me stories. So, like, I got a story from Corbin Hostler, who now writes The Week That Was, which is the column I started for Wizards of the Coast a number of years ago. And Corbin, when he first joined the coverage team, was apparently a fan of mine and was really, I don't know if starstruck's the right word, but really excited to meet me and really looking forward to it. And I kind of, wandered in a little hungover and grumpy and said some incredibly inappropriate thing about what I would be willing to do to get a Diet Mountain Dew right now. And like with Corbin, like about a foot behind me. And that was his introduction to me. So I don't know if starstruck's the right word, but certainly, disappointed fan or two along the way.
Maybe a little bit more intimidated after the Diet Mountain Dew. Is that your go-to? Is the Diet Mountain Dew? Is that still what you do? Or
I'm black coffee. Iced cold brew from Starbucks. It was really funny when I was doing the tournaments. I would end up with like 4 or 5 Trenta cold brew black coffees. Trenta's like the secret extra largest size at Starbucks, and because people would just be like, "Oh,
I never heard of Trenta. This is amazing."
Yeah, it's secret. Yeah. It's like the off menu size, and you can sit in it actually. And people would just bring, like Paul Cheon would be like, "Oh, hey, I got you, your thing," and someone else would come, and so I would end up having like 3 or 4 of those. But so that's really my drink of choice. But sometimes when you're in a convention center, something before the proliferation of Starbucks and Diet Mountain Dew was like my go-to caffeinated beverage.
I didn't even know there was a Diet Mountain Dew. I've got to try it. Like I've only had the vanilla regular one.
It's whatever it is, right? It's fine. It's weirdly a drink that I was aware of because when my brother, when we were young, he was diagnosed as diabetic, and Mountain Dew was his favorite soda. He loved Mountain Dew, and he was really upset that there wasn't a Diet Mountain Dew. It didn't exist at the time, and he sort of enlisted my help, and we wrote a business letter to Pepsi. Like hey, I'm whatever he was, right, 11 years old, and I'm a diabetic, and I really love, Mountain Dew, but I'm not able to drink that anymore, blah, blah, blah. So, he's like, is there something I could do to convince you to make a Diet Mountain Dew? Yeah, it didn't happen for years and years and years, but at the time they sent back a really nice letter and lots of Pepsi products. But so I'm always just very aware of Diet Mountain Dew. I don't know if maybe it's not some beverage that other people, but I have a strong emotional connection to it, to my brother.
Hey, I like to think that you and your brother had something to do with the formation of Diet Mountain Dew. That would be something to have on your Wikipedia page.
My brother certainly was known to kick some ass. So.
Yeah. How's your brother doing now?
So my brother passed away this year, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. He just complications from diabetes and from a couple strokes, and he earlier this year, and around my birthday, actually, he passed away. It was it was difficult, and so that's kind of maybe why I was feeling a little wistful about Diet Mountain Dew. So.
Yeah. My condolences.
Oh, thank you.
Did you just have just one brother, or you have multiple siblings?
That was my one sibling growing up. But I've always been a huge believer in found family. And so I have. There's a handful of people I consider my brothers and sisters, and extended family that has been really great for me and really great to me throughout this year. And, they knew who they are.
Yeah,
they've been a tremendous support system for me.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Like I think sometimes when you have really good friends, they just kind of become family, right? Like there's people that you can just talk to anything about. Like you can talk to them about anything. Like sometimes, like I have one brother, and sometimes I can't talk to my brother about even certain things that I would tell like some of my best friends, right? Because it's all contextual, right?
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I know a lot of people over the last couple of years have had politics come up in such a way that their family, that they've lost friendships with their family, and I've been very lucky with my family to not have that happen. But yeah, the extended family, the people that you gather around you as you sort of roll through life, the people that are, in the comic book store the first time you walk in there, who you're, the person who was always on the pinball machine, you would go into when you would go to that bar, and you'd end up, talking to, those people are that's a special kind of family. And I think that's a special kind of family, especially somehow that Magic players can really understand. You see a lot of those types of relationships, a lot of these kind of pods of people that form around people in the game.
Absolutely. Just bonding over a common topic. And I think like exactly the point where you meet your friends or people who become really good friends later, there's a kind of time capsule, right? It's like a part of you and that person is always in that. I guess this sounds kind of comic booky, which is also kind of appropriate, right? It's like there's a part of you and them that like forever stays in that period. Like when you first talk to them about, I don't know, Spider-Man or like some superhero, or like you first had that connection with pinball. It's
commit your first crime.
it's absolutely
together,
wonderful.
Whatever.
Sometimes you can just like not ever talk to them for a couple years, and then you meet them again and just kind of like pick right back up, right? I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, and we're having a couple over this weekend, and it's a woman I've known since I was probably like 14 or 15, and we were sort of both reading comic books, at the same time, and sort of forged a friendship that's endured for decades, and
Yeah.
and same thing, right? Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I haven't talked to you in a while. Oh, let's catch up, let's dinner, let's do this, but there's also the people that you'll meet that way that you talk to every day, right? And that's something pretty special.
For sure.
And magic is weird for me because I came to magic later than I think most people. I'm a little older than most of my contemporaries. Not a ton, but a little bit. And and magic really came along at a point where I think you're not expected to make lifelong friends anymore. Like when you're in your 20s, you're kind of like, you're kind of like, certain age, you're like, you're done.
Make good friends anymore. Yeah.
Maybe you make a gym friend, maybe you make a golf friend, maybe you make a this friend, but magic is just like, that's like the fire hose of friends. So, there's so many people I've met since I started playing the game. So,
how did you find magic initially? Like, what was your story?
So, my background is comic books. When I was a teenager, I became obsessed with comics. I have a signed copy of Uncanny X-Men 141, which is the first chapter of Days of Future Past, somewhere around here. I bought it off the newsstand. Had always been into comics and in and out of comics. But that comic was like, wow, it just blew my mind, right? Everything about it, from the cover to the story to the art, everything just clicked for me in this way, and I couldn't wait for the next issue to come out because it's a 2-part story. And the newsstand had no idea when it was coming out or what was going on, and so I kind of just figured out, maybe I looked in the yellow pages, maybe I talked to somebody, but figured out that there were comic book stores, and so found a comic book store in my neighborhood and went there, and they were like, oh, yeah, X-Men 142, that's going to be out in 2 more weeks, or a week and a half or whatever it is, coming on Wednesday. And, walking through the threshold of that comic book store, by crossing into that from the street into this space is like transformative, right? My entire life changes the moment I cross that threshold. I met, multiple people who I'm still like, my family, who are my family today. But I also just, was like, oh, comics, this is pretty cool. Just being around. So I was like, I'm going to make comics. I was like, I don't remember how old I am at this point. I'm probably around 14 or 15. I said, I'm gonna work in a comic book store. I get a job in a comic book store. I'll work for free if I have to. I don't really care. And eventually, I'll meet somebody in the industry, and then I'll offer to work for them for free. Right? I'll intern at their comic book company, and then when somebody screws up and doesn't turn in a script on time or whatever, right? I'll pounce on that opportunity.
You'll be right there.
I'll be right there.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked out exactly that way. It was really weird. Like I started working in this comic shop. Yeah, I started working in this comic book shop, comic book scene. I have the pin like right over here, but I don't want to.
Is this in New York or?
This was in Brooklyn, New York. It's not there anymore. It was a small shop run by a character, as many things in Brooklyn were at the time. And went to work for the store. Made a ton of friends and got really deeper and deeper into comics. Really expanded what I thought of as comics and read a lot of really cool stuff. And then met this guy Dave Singer. And Dave was starting a comic book company. He was doing a book called Wallywood's Thunder Agents, which was based on an old Tower Comics property called the Thunder Agents. And he had George Perez, who was drawing Teen Titans at the time, and Keith Giffen, who was drawing who was doing Legion of Superheroes at the time, and Roy Thomas, who was like the successor to Stan Lee at Marvel, and Steve Ditko, who created Spider-Man with Stan Lee, and I don't even remember everybody else, but and Dave Cockrum, who created the new X-Men, all doing stuff for him at this new comic book company. And I was like, wow, this is awesome.
This is like the all-star team right here.
And it's 3 blocks from my house. It's literally his office was just like an apartment he rented in this building on East 12th Street, I want to say, in Brooklyn. I grew up on East 8th Street. So 6 blocks, 4 blocks. And he was like, yeah, we definitely need, an intern. And I'm like, great. And so I will come out of school every day.
Forget school. Who cares?
I will be here, and it was crazy, right? I was, again, a kid, and I'm just like sort of hanging out there, and everyone's much older than me and much more nerd savvy. People are like starting to talk about like the name of the spaceship in Alien, and I'm like, wait, you know the name of the spaceship in Alien? What do you mean? You know the names of directors of movies? Oh, weird. I never thought, and so like it was this real educational process for me, and I got to meet my heroes. I got to meet Steve Ditko. I got to meet Murphy Anderson. I got to meet George Perez. I got to meet Dave Cockrum and Patty Cockrum. I got to, it was kind of wild and heady, and then I got to write a story. I got to someone. I think Roy Thomas backed out of working with them, and they needed a script for something, and I got to fill in for Roy Thomas on a comic book story. I got to write it.
What was that story? What did you write about, and what was your process?
It was Wallywood's Thunder. It was the main title. It was the main story. Wallywood's Thunder Agents was a 48-page comic that would have like 2 short stories and 1 main story. The Thunder Agents were a superhero team. Very, very much Men from U.N.C.L.E. era. It's T.H.U.N. Thunder Agents. I don't remember what it stands for.
Yeah.
And I got to write the story. So they needed. I think the story had been written into a corner. There was a cliffhanger, and they needed a solution. And I came up with. I didn't trust myself to write the dialogue, so I plotted out the story, which is where a Marvel-style script. So a DC-style script is a script where you write all the action, you break down what's in every panel, you include all the dialogue, you tell the artist exactly what to draw at every step along the way. Marvel-style script is more collaborative. It's kind of like, okay, on this page, Spider-Man's going to start in the park, and then he's going to end up here, and then because on the next page he's going to be fighting Doc Ock, and this is the kind of banter that happens, and it can be a little looser. So I wrote I had to go to someone else's house to use a computer. I didn't have a computer at the time, right? Like I think we had a typewriter, but I
was going to say typewriter, yeah.
We definitely had a typewriter, but I was nervous, and so a friend of mine was talking to me about word processing. Again, this is in the 80s. So this was still a fairly new thing. And so the idea that you could move stuff around and change and edit was precise. I used my friend Dorian's computer, I remember, and wrote it and printed it out. And yeah, it got drawn by, who drew? Did Rich Buckler? Yeah, Rich Buckler drew the comic. So Rich Buckler was someone who worked on Fantastic Four and the Avengers, and I have some pretty funny stories about ultimately, but probably not fit for this podcast. And then I started, writing comics. And was promoted to an editor. Again, I'm still in high school, and I got promoted to an editor at the comic book company. Was corresponding with all of this talent. Heartbreaking story. I am going through the slush pile and stop me if I go wander and digress too much, because I can.
No, this is all about digressions. This podcast.
Okay, good.
This is what I want. If we only talk about magic, this podcast will be an absolute failure. That's what I tell all my guests. It'll be a failure if we only talk about magic. So.
All right. So I get my one of the things. They're like, hey, you got to go through the slush pile, right? And
what
so
is the slush pile? I don't
slush
even know
pile
what that is.
If you just send a cold submission to a book publisher or a comic book company, it gets thrown on the slush pile. I don't know what the origin is, right? But like, it's like, here's this pile of stuff that people have sent us. And you know what? Most of the time it's terrible, right? Or most of the time it's really primordial, even if it's good, and it really needs a ton of work. But sometimes you find a gem in there, right? And like sometimes something comes that stands out and you're just like, holy cow, I can't believe this person just like slipped this under the door. And so it's not an exciting job because you got to trudge through a lot of stuff, but I was like, okay, I'll do the slush pile, and I was really diligent back then, but, and this was all on a typewriter, like typing out letters and saying, thank you for your submission. And,
wow.
And I get to one and I'm like, no. Wait, and I read the cover letter, and it's from Jerry Siegel, the creator of Superman. The man who wrote Superman, and who created Superman, who invented the comic book industry, essentially, right? The superhero genre as we know it. And it's just, he's just like, hey, here's my, I wish I could remember the name of it. I wish I'd kept my files from work when I left there. It was the Red Mask, MASQUE. It was maybe a little corny or maybe a little retro feeling, right? Like it was definitely had a very golden age vibe about it, but it was cool, and it was Jerry frickin' Siegel, right? Can I curse here? Yeah. What's the cursing?
You can say anything. Yeah, there's
Jerry
no policy.
Fucking Siegel, holy fucking shit! Like this, and I'm like, so I write him a letter. I'm like, oh my god, Jerry Siegel. I'm sitting here. I'm working in comics. I wouldn't be here doing this if you don't create Superman. This is such an honor to be writing to you. I said, how do we make this happen? Right? How do we do this book? I would love to do this book. I am way out over my skis here, by the way, at this moment, right? Like doing this. I'm like, I think Jerry Ordway is an artist that we've been started working with, and Jerry has this great golden age aesthetic. I would love to reach out to Jerry Ordway and see if he wants to draw this. I think that we really lean into, this kind of retro futurism kind of look and feel for it. And, and he sends me back a letter and he's like, oh my God, thank you so much. I've gone through this, you would not believe how hard it's been for me to find someone who's interested in doing this. And by the way, I've just not talked to my boss about this. Right? I've just...
You're just like, I'm going to make this happen.
I'm just going to make this happen. And sure enough, I'm just confident, right? Like that this is going to be like, and Dave, Dave was he was one of those guys, man, heartbreaking to think about this. He was so into what was modern, what was new, right? The new hotness, you know what I mean? Like whatever it was, right? Everyone he had taken into the company to work on the titles, was someone who was on the cutting edge of what people were doing in comics, right? George Perez, Dave Cockrum, Keith Giffen, etc. I don't know, some reason hired me, but I wasn't, right? So I was just like, and he made me write a letter to Jerry Siegel. He was like, look, you have to tell him we can't do this book and we're not interested, and you should apologize for wasting his time. And I did. And I got this super gracious letter back from Jerry Siegel. He's like, look, I understand. He's like, I kind of thought this would happen. Like I don't expect that anybody wants me to do it. I'm like, and that event sort of lights the fuse for me that like I can't really work for people. Right, like I had this really clear vision of something that I wanted to do that I know would have been well received.
Like in your heart, you knew this was the right project.
I knew, and so, I started making plans to start my own comic book company at that point. And, you know, and I don't know, and I don't remember the details. I don't know. I guess all of that, you know, it wasn't like you had like you know, you could email your contact list to yourself. I think we had like a Rolodex at the office that had all the, so I didn't have, and when I left, it was, you know, not under the best terms, you know, so I didn't have, and I didn't know how to get in touch with Jerry Siegel. I guess, I don't even know, you know, because I would have certainly done something, but I started my own comic book company, which was a company called Eternity Comics, and did that for a few years. We published a number of books, and again, an amazing time in my life in terms of, you know, making some lousy comics, some great comics, some really like kind of like by the seat of your pants, just trying to figure out how to do stuff, comics. Made some great friends, and eventually didn't want to move to California. The company with the person who funded the company for us and started it was rolling up two companies into one company out in LA. I was the vice president of the company at the time. But did not want to move. So stayed in New York, sold my interest in the company off, and that company eventually becomes Malibu Entertainment, which is the company that published. That got bought by Marvel Comics a few years later.
Yeah.
And then,
that's a period I remember. Malibu.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that was. And so I was out of comics for years. I started working in public relations, which was, you know, sort of, before I got into comics, I was like, oh, maybe I'll become a lawyer. And then I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And so I started, I moved in a direction of wanting to do public relations.
Did you continue going to school while you were building Eternity, or did you just?
I was always a good test taker, James. So I was always a good.
You knew
test
what
taker.
it took to pass.
So I could digress off the digression into stories. You know,
digress off the digression.
Way through school, but so anyway, yeah. So I go into I start working in public relations, and it's miserable. It's just miserable. Everything is just about like lying, right? And you know, to me, it's just about telling a story, right? This is what I tell myself as I'm going into it. It's like, oh, you're going to tell a story. You're going to talk about this product. You're going to talk about this person. You're going to talk about this company, and you're going to promote them. But really, it's just about like finding this like vulnerable point in a competitor, or exploiting some weakness. And it was so predatory. It was so miserable. And I quit a succession of jobs at the three biggest PR firms. Hill and Knowlton, Barston Marsteller, and a medical PR firm that was kind of the worst. Within like 2 months, I went boom, boom, boom. I was just out.
Wow.
And
okay, it just didn't fit your compass.
Didn't fit. No. And then I went to work doing public relations for a nonprofit agency for a couple of years. But all the while, now we're into the early 90s now. You know, Malibu is doing really well. I'm like, that stinks. I mean, good for them, but you know, I'm like,
yeah.
And I just kind of was like, man, I really want to get back into comics. And how do I do this? You know, how do I get back in? Like, you know, I've like, everything has sort of drifted into all these different directions. How do I get back in? And so I decided, no, I'll go to work for a comic book store. Right? That worked last time. Right? And so now I'm armed with this PR background and this, semi-attended education of that qualifies me to do these things. And I go to Jim Hanley's Universe, which is this amazing comic book shop from Staten Island that had just opened up multiple locations in Manhattan. And I convinced them to, hey, I just kind of want to get back into it. I started working there over the Christmas holidays, and then was their director of marketing. I became their director of marketing and ran a bunch of events for them. But I was throughout all of this, I was always a gamer. Right? I was always someone who played games, played board games, played role playing games. Some, not as much as I would ever liked. And was the game expert for the store, right? Like we're ordering new game products. And whenever someone would have a question about games, if I was in the store, I would end up fielding, right? And so people in the, so November 94, first tournament. So it's probably like late 93 or early, very, very, very early 94. People start like coming in and asking if we have magic. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. People are just like kind of mad. I'm like, is this something from like White Wolf? Is this like Mage? Is this some product? I don't know what it is.
You're thinking it's some sort of established IP or brand.
Right? Yeah. And I've told this story before, but it's a true story. It's like some guy comes, this big guy, and he's like, do you have, Magic the Gathering? And I'm like, and it's the first time someone says like the full name of the product to me, right? So, and so I'm like, no, and the guy kind of just picks me up by like my lapels and like kind of like shakes me, not because he's mad at me. You know what I mean? It's a weird thing to observe at the time, right? But like, that he's just upset. He's like, why can't I find this fucking game? And I kind of sort of stomps off. And I was like, Glenn, we need to order Magic the Gathering, right? we need to find out what this is. And
hard to forget that, yeah.
Yeah, and so we track it down. We can't get any. We can't order any. This is all of this is sort of somewhere between the release of Beta and Unlimited in New York. Right? I don't know when that happened relative to where it happened in other parts of the country. But the Complete Strategist store I'll be going to on Saturday to play my Brother's War pre-release is still there. They were the only place that sold Magic in the city, really. And they were getting a little bit of Unlimited back in. And so me and my board game group and a couple of other people all bought like 2 starters of Unlimited and like 6 boosters or something like that. I think whatever we were allowed to buy. And just started playing. Had no idea what we were doing. And kind of it just kind of snowballed from there, right? It's like, okay, we're not going to buy anymore. We're not going to buy Antiquities or Arabian Nights, guys. We're playing for ante. It's not fair to keep introducing cards, right? The idea is someone's going to win all the good cards eventually. We can't keep adding cards to the pool. It's not fair. And then one friend went out and bought a box of Antiquities, and we're like, oh, well, that's it. Now we're all buying cards. And I think the first product I bought a lot of was Legends, right? Where I bought as many boxes as I was allowed to buy at the time.
Was it all MSRP, or was the store marking it up, or?
Strategist was always MSRP. We would often at Jim Haley's Universe buy the stuff at MSRP and then mark it up so we'd have stuff to sell in the store if we could get our hands on it. We were ordering product at this point and selling stuff and selling dark packs at some like exorbitant markup and as things went. I don't even remember the order of anything anymore. But we became a place where it might not be MSRP, but we're going to always make sure you have Magic. We were going on to bulletin boards.
Yep.
And buying packs from, this sort of burgeoning secondary market for product. It was a baseball card retailer's bulletin board. And we were going in there and we found people who had Magic. And so we would.
Right, because there was no genre for Magic cards yet. Yeah, it was just sports cards.
Yeah. And so we always had cards. And so we became like this place where people would come to buy Magic cards, packs. And so you start to meet people. And then I met this guy, Tony Perotti. And Tony was the first person I knew who was what we would describe now as online. He was, he was on all the message board, right? He was on all the, the news.
It was like pre-internet.
Yeah. But no, he was internet, right? Like he had email. He got a subscription.
I mean, he was like the early adopter, right?
Yes, he was the early adopter, and he knew all the rules for Magic. He knew the rules. He was up to date. He's like, here's what they just banned these cards, or you can only play with 4 of a card now. Here's this. And so, so we were all hooked, and we were excited, and the first thing I wanted to do with Magic actually was, of course, a comic book, right? Like, first thing I wanted to do was I want to make a Magic comic. I want to tell, and so I actually commissioned. I have them somewhere. 3 painted pages for a story called A Council of Dragons, which was about the Elder Dragons getting together for some sort of, conclave, where they were going to talk about Elder Dragon shit. I don't remember, it was very much teaser pages, right? Like, but it was like painted art, really, really beautiful. And we actually flew out to Renton to pitch them that we wanted to make this comic book. But I think Dark Horse.
And what happened?
I think Dark Horse. Yeah. Basically, at the time, I was like, well, no one still, even though we know about Magic, nobody knows, but everybody knew. Marvel was beating down their door. DC was beating down their door. Dark Horse was beating down their door. And, I was looking, to figure, I'm like, I've got a paycheck here, like I didn't have the resources to get the license at that point. But I met a lot of people at Wizards and became really aware of what was a lot of, like, I guess what their plans were for the game and how things were going. And we decided that events were something that weren't really happening around us. There'd been a tournament, right, or two. Like, there was a store that would occasionally run, like, hey, come in and play this whatever format. But it would be like, you come in, you get eliminated, you go home, right? Or there was one thing that was called the Seaport Tournament at South Street Seaport, and like I think they had like 30 people, which was huge, a huge number at the time. But same thing, right? It was just like, come and play, and it was like, and I'm coming now from this background of public relations, and I'm coming from this background of running these huge comic events for the Jim Hales universe. What my role there had been coordinating, like, okay, we're going to have the entire team from Wildcats #1 in the store. They're going to go to all 4 stores. We're going to do this signing. We're going to make these certificates of authenticity. We're going to, promote this way. And so we had some recent lessons to draw on, and we were like, let's make an event. Let's make a tournament. So we rented out a ballroom at the Roosevelt Hotel. I think if you look at what you think of as a GP, or even to some extent what just happened in Vegas with Magic 30, right? Like, it was a small scale, very similar, right? Like, we're gonna have artists, and we're gonna have dealers, and we're gonna have multiple events. We're not gonna just, here's a main event, you can win a set of Arabian Nights. That was our prize. But, we also wanted to make sure you're here all day. And we wanted to make sure people felt like they were getting their money's worth for their $14 entry fee. And so we came up with a whole series of, we kind of invented side events, right? at this tournament. And it was a wild success. And
was that the first Magic convention, or
I think it's the first Magic convention. So there's certainly, earlier that year, Wizards of the Coast ran World Championships, but they ran it at Gen Con, right? So it's at a gaming convention, so it's not really an event specifically focused on Magic.
Not a standalone. Yeah,
I think this is the first large scale standalone event for Magic. We had people come in from all over the place. Right? I mean, it was like, and I think it was like approaching 300 players, right? Which doesn't seem big by today's standards, but at the time was was like a number that like gave me nightmares for months afterwards. You know, people like, "Hey, Judge Brian," asking for stuff. And yeah, it was a wild success. I know people who met at that tournament, got married, and have children today who play Magic. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So it's crazy. And so then just went down that road, started running tournaments. We reran that. So I don't know if you've ever seen it. Marshall Sutcliffe, we used to do a video channel called Video Rewind, like MTG Rewind, where he would sit down.
I did not know that.
Okay. So yeah, it was this great chat thing where he would sit down with like Brad Nelson, and Brad would they would replay one of Brad's most famous matches. And Brad would like kind of do director's commentary over the match. And I was like, Marsh, I have this great video that we should do this with. And he's like, well, is it a match of Magic? I'm like, no. And he's like, I don't know. My crowd really wants match play. I'm like, trust me, you're going to be interested in this. So I have like 30 minutes of footage from that event. Like sign-ups, people playing Magic, announcements, getting the round started, and we had match footage of the finals. We had like and an interview with the winner after the tournament was over. So he was like, oh yeah, okay, we got to do this. So Marshall and I sat down and did like a director's commentary over this like half hour. It's so wild. People just shuffling boxes with no sleeves, dual lands, fireballing each other for one, like crazy, crazy.
The crazy old days. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, with that event, we just kind of realized there was something there. Ran another event in February, which had like 1,000 people show up. Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, and we couldn't get people to leave. Right. That was the, right. Like we couldn't so by the time we do our third event in March, we're getting charged overages for the room because people won't go home. They just want to play more Magic. They just want to play in more events.
People are just sitting on the ground if they have to, just playing, right?
Yep. And so it occurs to me at some point, between those second and third tournaments, that there's this appetite to have this environment where you're around people who are playing Magic, a calendar of events for Magic that is more than once a month. And so the first thing there is to start now running these events in other cities and on other weekends. But then the other is to create neutral ground, which is what I believe to be the first tournament center. Right? It's a term we invented for the store, right, to describe it. And it was in the first location, a 2,500 square foot space in Chelsea, Manhattan, on the 9th floor of a building, the entire 9th floor. And you would, it had about 400 square feet for retail. With showcases with cards in there. We had some back offices. We had, some supplies on shelves, probably some Warhammer stuff. But 2,000 feet was play space. It was tables and chairs. Right. And we produced a calendar of events 7 days a week, every day you come in, there would be at least one Magic tournament. You could always just like get people to play you sealed deck. People used to play sealed deck for money. People would buy a starter and 2 boosters, mash them together and play for money. It was crazy. But you'd always, and we were just, and so we started doing mail order, we started doing that, and then that was the next handful of years of my life was running.
And this is the first of its kind, right? This is like a true innovation. Like this is a tournament space in a store, right?
Yeah. It was a place to play Magic and other games, right? We worked with other games as well, right? But it was primarily Magic, and the idea was you could come there. We would always have what you think of as Mock's boarding house right now, or Cafe Mox or whatever it's called in Seattle, right? Like, except instead of having good food, we sold Hot Pockets and Pepsi. You know, but
The gamer's diet. Yeah.
but it was a place where you would go and you'd like play Magic, and you're like, there was no Magic card you could ask us for that we wouldn't have in stock. Right? We had these high density library drawers filled with, and so we were like, hey, if you want dual lands, we got them. If you need GSEMs, we got them. You need boxes, we got them. I don't even want to think about the value of Black Lotuses that passed through my hands over the years.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And then that really, you know, we opened that in May of '95, I think. So
how did you guys even get the word out? Was it just purely word of mouth that people knew about Neutral Ground, or what?
So we took ads in every magazine that had that was writing about gaming. We had a sign at the Complete Strategist because we sold singles and offered play space. It wasn't, the strategists didn't view us as a competitor to them. They didn't sell singles. And so people were always like, well, where do I go to play Magic? So they loved their employees would all come and play Magic at our place, or play miniature games, or play D&D, right? Like you could do whatever.
Sure.
So they loved telling people to come to us. And yeah, we just ran events, and, you know, we would, again, now we're also we're running a monthly tournament in New York where we're advertising our store. We're running a monthly event in New Jersey where we're advertising our store. We're running 2 monthly events in Philadelphia, one in Philadelphia and one that bounces back and forth between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. We're running an event in Connecticut on a bi-monthly basis. And so those would be these hot, and then it was like, and so it was like those would become like feeders to get people to come into the store. And people would come from pretty far away to come into the store. You know, I know you had Ben Seck on recently, and I was talking to Ben, and, you know, I felt like I first met Ben at Grand Prix Thailand, Grand Prix Bangkok in 2002 or 3 or whatever. And he's like, oh no, we met before. And he's like, when I qualified for Pro Tour New York in Mines, for Pro Tour New York, that would, you know, was in Rye, New York. Sorry, I don't know why I have Mines on my mind. When I qualified for Pro Tour Rye, and I flew into New York, I got in a cab, and I basically said to the cabbie, take me to Neutral Ground. And like before he even went to his hotel, he was at Neutral Ground. And man, I don't know, you know, you know,
because Neutral Ground was the mecca, right? It was the mecca of Magic.
And so he came in, he played sealed deck against Jon Finkel, and played against, I think it might have been like he came in, played in an event, played Steve O'Moni Schwartz and Jon Finkel in the first 2 rounds or something like that, you know. And then went off to the Pro Tour. So that's my short answer to how I got into Magic.
No, that's great. I mean, a lot of amazing names pass through those elevators. I mean, it's just like, unfortunately I never had the chance to visit when it was around, but it's just so iconic, right? It's basically the Magic equivalent of like getting off the plane in New York and then going to like Madison Square Garden and watching basketball. Instead it's playing Magic or watching Magic.
Or watching Magic. I mean, I think that was a big part of it, right? Like we had so many great players there. Like you could just learn so much. Just to sort of absorb the Magic.
Yeah. And I know that the next question I'm going to ask has the risk of becoming a 5-hour podcast on its own, but maybe we could do one on that. But like, what are some of your most memorable moments with players in those early days? Like, maybe just give me like 1 or 2 really notable interactions. I mean, Ben Seck was one for sure, but from his perspective, right?
From his perspective, I don't really remember Ben until he was a little older, and we were in at GP Thailand together. So when we opened the store, we had no idea if anyone would show up. It was like crazy, right? We quit our jobs. We, pooled our Magic card collections. We put in some money, and we're like, let's do this. I don't know what the hell my wife was thinking, but I
mean, leap of faith, right? Let's be real. I mean, back then, who knew, right?
Yeah. And the way Neutral Ground worked was, you know, we really wanted it to just be, we wanted people to feel like this was their place. And this is going to sound like a weird thing to do, but we would charge people to use the space. So you could come in and shop at any time, right? Like if you want to come in and shop, we got cards, we get this. If you spent more than a certain amount of money, I think it was $20, you could get a free day pass to use the tournament area. But if you wanted to play in a tournament, if you wanted to, you know, use the tables, it was $7 a day, $35 a month, I think was the price, or $250 for an annual membership. Mm-hmm. And we made, you know, I can look, I have the sign right here, actually. I have the first sign right here.
Sounds like a bargain, honestly. I would definitely pay the weekly or the monthly rate instead of the daily rate.
And we had no idea, you know, again, same thing. And, you know, we were like, okay, and, you know, we set up and we get this place all, you know, done up, and we have the tables and the chairs. And, you know, the place was not what you think of, right? Like when you think of these stores now, right? If you think of Mox Boarding House or any of them, like modern gaming, they're beautiful. This was not. I mean, it was clean-ish, right? But it was like the 9th floor of a building that was, you know, that we could afford to be in, right? So it was like, you know, it was air conditioning was always a challenge, but you know, we have no idea if anyone's going to show up. And elevator opens up, which is always also an adventure. And the first people off the elevator are Steve O'Mahony-Schwartz and Dan O'Mahony-Schwartz. Steve and Dan had been coming to our Gray Matter events. They were pretty active on message boards, Steve especially. When we were thinking about starting the store, I had talked to Steve a few times, you know, to get his feedback. And they're probably, by the way, at the time, 14 or 15 years old, right? So, but I know to trust the instincts of a 14 or 15-year-old because that's where my career starts, right? You know? And,
yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
And they're like, you did it. That's awesome. Here's $500 for 2 annual memberships. And it was a check from their mom, Joan, you know, and so like, you know, we were open for 5 minutes and we had our first 2 annual memberships.
It was like one of your first members right there. Yeah. 2 Hall of Fame legendary players.
Yeah. Well, Dan never played as hard as his brother. Steve's the Hall of Famer. I think sure. Dan didn't have that same fire that his brother had, I think. To just push through on some of the bad beats and all that. But 2 great players and people who I'm happy to still know, right? And, you know, still see and deal with on a semi-regular basis. So, yeah, so that's one. And there's I think one of the weirdest interactions is, so we have a ton of celebrity kids coming into the store. Like, you know, like Steven Spielberg's son used to play games at the store, and the woman who played the coroner in Law and Order, I don't remember her name now, but her kid would come in and play. And it was like a group of actors' kids. And there was this one kid, Joe, who would come in and with his mom, and, you know, he would come in, he was shooting a movie, and we would hang out, we'd talk, and we'd play Magic, and he's like, I think I'm going to buy a full set of the Power 9. You know, I'm like, all right, you know, sounds great. Let me show you what we got. We sold it to him. We played some games. You know, cool. He's like, all right, you know, that was it. We're done going back to LA. You know, the movie that he was shooting was The Juror, and the actor was Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Oh,
as a kid, and you know, apparently years later on Gavin's Magic video cast.
Yeah, he plays Magic, right?
He showed him all these old cards that he bought at, you know, Neutral Ground years ago.
Oh, so, they're from Neutral Ground.
Yeah, he bought it. Yeah, okay. He bought them from Neutral Ground. Yeah, he was just, which is really cool. So, you know, super nice kid. His mom was awesome. She was, you know, whatever stage mom stereotypes might exist in your head, she definitely dispelled them. But you know, But
actually pretty normal then.
pretty normal, yeah. Just like, just a cool mom who indulged her kid in his hobbies, right? Which is all you could ask for from a parent.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what was it like to deal with or work with Wizards of the Coast people like in the 90s? I know you mentioned going to Renton. I've read a lot about it because I just to let you know, I started playing Magic with my brother in revised edition, so not as early as you did. But I remember
early.
those kind of like
people realize how close together all those sets were, right? That's like
oh yeah, it was an
revised
explosion.
was like
it was an
95,
avalanche, right? Yeah, because they couldn't. Because like people don't know now, but like they couldn't keep Magic around. Like it was just like, so when you're telling me the story of like you can't find Magic, like I think people now have no idea of that. At least anyone who's gone into Magic in the last 20 years, like because now you can find print runs of everything. But like back then, you had to like I had to get my mom to like drive me to a store to find this packs because like this place is sold out, that place was sold out. Like the stores couldn't keep them on the shelves. Like people would just buy them instantly when they came in, right? So the reason I asked you about MSRP was just like, even back then, like if I could get my hands on any product, I'll just beg my mom to like help me pay for it because like you couldn't keep the product, right? And just to give you an idea, like, or to give people listening the idea, like when I played in the 90s, just like when you played in the 90s, like it was so scarce. And so revised edition was kind of like, I don't want to call it like a snap response, but it was like because there was beta, it was alpha, and then it like literally no one could find alpha. It was just gone in a second, right? And then there was beta, and then unlimited because of beta sold out, and then I think revised was just kind of like I'm pretty sure it came out like pretty quickly after that. But like my indoctrination was like revised, and my brother and I just went to the mall back then and there's a gaming store, and there was like that 2-player revised edition set, right? And back then, like, we didn't have money, so it was just like, singles were very expensive. So even back then, they were like selling singles for like, was it Shivan Dragon was like $20 or $30 or whatever. And we're just like, yeah, let's just buy the sealed stuff. And it's just like, after that, okay, this is a really long tangent from me, but it's like after that, I started buying like the Duelist and like reading about Magic. And so I would read all this stuff about the Magic culture, even though I wasn't going to tournaments or even playing that much.
Where were you living at the time?
Vancouver, Canada.
Okay.
And I have to shout out a store in Vancouver, Canada. I don't know if you know this store. It's no longer around. It was called Mishra's Game Factory.
Of course. Yeah. And they also advertised in all the magazines. Yeah.
Yeah.
They would advertise in the Duelist.
I think I might have read about Neutral Ground or seen an ad somewhere in a store there. But I remember like Mishra's Game Factory. I wish I could find the photo now, but they actually commissioned Christopher Rush to like paint this beautiful mural, right? It was like 3 rooms. I don't know how long it was, but it was incredible. It was just like original artwork. And they put that in the back room. So it's like the play area of that store was literally like an original commission by Christopher Rush. Like it had like tree folk, it had goblins, it had like the stuff that he was drawing on Magic cards for Magic cards. Like they did a one-off. Like I need to find the photo and send it to you because it was just
please.
It was just incredible. The store was like as cold as a fridge, but I will never forget that mural. It was just
given the air conditioning at Neutral Ground, that sounds amazing to me. I don't know if you saw, but I was holding up a revised booster pack. When I was at Magic 30, Sam Tang, I don't know if you know Sam or not.
He did the Kitchen Table Magic podcast. He's out of Seattle for a time, right?
He, a group of people were doing a chaos draft, and he was like, "We're going to open a revised booster." And so he brought a revised booster. We opened it up. We shuffled it. We put the cards face down, and everyone who was at the table just got to pick one card face down from the revised pack. It was super fun. There's like something about the texture, like that. I got a conservator out of the pack. There's something about this, like the faded color of revised, like the washed out color, and like it's like almost like a rougher texture to the card back than what you think of today. It's
just beautiful, and that smell.
They really
right?
are.
I guess the smell is kind of around, but yeah.
No, there's something pretty special about revised.
Definitely. So back to the question was like, because I remember reading about Wizards and what it was like. Because I mean, they really were a startup back then, like with Peter Atkinson and people in the company and like a handful of artists they commissioned. So what was it like working with Wizards or dealing with them? Like, yeah.
So when we started, again, I went out there. I'd met some people for the comic thing, and there was a lot of turnover at Wizards, and so those people turned over pretty quickly. And then when we started running events, we got set up to run Sanctioned, the Duelist Convocation, right? Or the Duelist Convocation.
Yeah, DCI.
And so, but the way the old DCI worked was it wasn't ELO, right? It was you got points because everything was single elimination in the early days of tournament Magic.
I had no idea. I didn't play tournaments.
Everything was single elimination. Yeah. Oh my god, that was such we had no idea that when we ran our first tournament. We figured it out about 10 minutes before the first round. Like, we fortunately had someone who was like had run chess tournaments who was playing in our event, and he was like, I was waiting to see if you guys knew. He's like, you don't know. Let me tell you how this works. Because, in your mind, without knowing anything, you're just like, well, I'll just pair everyone up. Someone will get a bye, and we'll keep doing that.
Yeah.
But you end up with a mess down the road. So, yeah, he helped us get set up with that. But, and the way it would work is you would get points. You would get a certain amount of points for every round you advance in the tournament. And because it was single elim, right, the person who got it to the 10th round is the only person who gets that volume of points, and that was how the system worked. It was accumulation system, and I don't know, we didn't love it. We didn't like the bookkeeping that was involved in it. We were like, I don't know if we're gonna do sanctioning anymore. Right? We didn't see any value in it. And it's so funny. I remember we were running some event, or maybe someone else was running regionals. There was regionals in '96, and someone else was running it. It wasn't us, because we weren't doing sanctioning, right? Like, we were, and I remember Heather Hendricks from Wizards of the Coast, who was like, I think ran their OP department, organized play department at the time, came up to me, and I knew who she was, but she didn't know that I knew who she was. She was like, oh, because we would produce this calendar of events for Neutral Ground. It was a booklet. In the middle spread, the centerfold was a calendar, and it was everything that was going on. But, and then each page would be like, this tournament, that event, these rules. It's kind of crazy. I just actually connected with one of my old employees at Magic 30 who I haven't seen in years. And he has almost a complete catalog of the old Neutral Grand calendars, which I'm going to get a chance to scan.
Wow, that's a collector's item right there.
Oh, yeah, I'm really excited. But, so she came up to me, she was like, oh, so these Magic events, are they sanctioned by the DCI? Like, she's trying to trap me or something, and I'm like, no, why would I sanction anything? Like, what good is, like, what's the value in that? And so she was like, oh, well, I'm Heather Hendricks from the DCI. I'm like, oh, yes, I know. Nice to meet you, Heather. I didn't know. And
this is like the Wizards version of entrapment. Like, I'm a police officer.
Exactly. So then we got flown out to Renton to meet with the Wizards team and talk about this thing called the Pro Tour, and that they were running, and some other events. Actually, like, before they ran the Pro Tour, they ran something called the Gathering, which was the Homelands pre-release, which was this big one. It was a one-off event. There was only one Homelands event. It was in New York at the Millennium Hotel.
Oh my gosh, my mind is blown. I had no idea they even did that.
They did that with Ice Age too. They did an Ice Age event in Toronto. So, and by the way, just in terms of Magic being a skill game, winner of the Seattle event, of the Homelands event, Steve-O Mahoney Schwartz. Winner of the Toronto event, David Humphreys. So a couple of Hall of Famers.
Cream rises to the top.
Yeah. But so they'd run like these two events, and they were going to run this other Pro Tour, and so they convinced us that we should that we wanted to sanction events again, because people were going to start using that rank rating to get invited to events, and that there was this, consistent pattern. So that's when we got back into it. But it was just always very funny. But one of the highlights for me from that trip was, this is somewhere again, probably mid to late 95, and meeting Richard, I think for the second time, Richard Garfield, and meeting Mark Rosewater for the first time. I'm pretty sure he was there at that point. These memories are old, so some of them kind of, the timelines kind of get a little frayed, but it was definitely Richard, because Richard introduced me to the concept of booster drafting for the first time. He's like, hey, you want to talk about someone like,
from the creator himself.
Hey, we've invented this thing called heroin. Do you want to try it?
Just inject it right here.
Yeah. He was like, hey, we've invented this thing called booster drafting. Do you want to try it? And I was like, what do I have to do? And he's like, just sit down. Here's 3 revised booster packs. And I sat down at a draft table with R&D and drafted. I remember drafting a Nevernell's disc and a Sylvan library. So I've always been of a type. And I think I got a millstone in that deck too. It's like I drafted some weird, not very good deck, the way most decks were back then. But I was hooked, right? I was hooked. It was like, I was like, I'm never playing Seal deck again, because we would always play Seal. And so I became a very early advocate for draft at Neutral Ground, and we
I have to ask, how did they even come up with booster draft? Like, it sounds like it's something that Wizards or maybe Richard Garfield just idealized or put into a concept later on, right? So
I think that they were trying to figure out different ways to play, and I think Sealed, there was some Sealed deck play, but I think it just wasn't. Sealed deck was just bad, right? Like, it was just bad back then. Like, you just didn't have a lot of great solutions, and you didn't feel like you were making decisions. And I don't know the exact origin, but I'm going to guess it comes from just putting more agency and more deck building power, choices, putting more choices in the hands of the players, as opposed to just opening the cards and then selecting some to build with, right? Drafting and building on the fly. It's just the kind of, I'm sure Richard came up with it, but I don't know for sure. But he was very excited about it. It was a format that he really cared about, and it was clear he was excited to show it off. In fact, my first draft, I think I had Richard passing to me, which is like, oh my God, really? This is awesome.
No, that's incredible. I mean, obviously it's genius just to even come up with the game, but to even come up with the idea of, like, you open a pack and then you sit in a row in a ring in a circle and you just pass it on, and it's just like, my mind is blown just thinking, like, going back to that period in time. Like, how does someone even come up with that?
Right.
Like that's
like,
if you look up revolutionary, magic? Like that's
how does someone come up with magic?
It's incredible.
Yeah. I part of this thread today where people were talking about Magic Hall of Fame. Ben Blyweiss was like, well, who should, if we're opening up Magic Beyond players, who should be in the Hall of Fame? And it's one of those things where he tags me in it. And I'm like, don't tag me in this, please. I don't like if you're going to do an actual Magic Hall of Fame, I'm not so falsely modest that I don't think I belong there, but I don't want to talk about why I might belong there. And there's a whole bunch of people who I think belong there long before I belong there, right? Like, when I think of a Hall of Fame, I think of it as this kind of like layered thing. But someone
there's
was like,
succession. Just like in sports.
And it's like, the professor, probably gets into the Magic Hall of Fame. He doesn't go in that first, so I'm like, just leave me out of this whole conversation. I don't want to have it. But somebody was just like, well, I'm not sure Richard Garfield belongs in the Magic Hall of Fame. And I'm like, dude, like, you've heard of the butterfly effect? This guy is a whole herd of butterflies flapping their wings in your face. Your life is completely different if he doesn't invent magic. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's like, just I'm flabbergasted by the conversation.
It's like saying, Stan Lee shouldn't be in the comic book Hall of Fame or something. If there is one.
I was like, what are you
it's
talking
like,
about?
He only created Marvel and like Spider-Man and these properties, right?
It's funny. Yeah. I recently had the revelation that, Richard really is analogous to Stan Lee or George Lucas or, like these people who've just...
It's the same pantheon, really.
Right, yeah. Let's be real. It's a very small group of people who have created this franchise, this play pattern, this sub industries, right? Like think about and nothing is like Magic. Nothing is like Magic. Think about at Magic 30. Think about all the people who were there, the artists who were there, the vendors who were there, the cosplayers who were there, the players who were there, the content creators who were there, the judges who were there. That's just like off the top of my head, right? Like
literally created an entire industry from nothing.
Yes, and people who are writing, and people who are doing video, and people who are doing TikToks, and people who are making their living off of Magic in all of these really different, unique ways. There's really something special about that. Although we did get the downside of the butterfly effect. I was talking to Ili Cassis, who was the finalist at the Worlds, and someone who's been playing Magic possibly longer than I have. Someone who was an old-time gray matter guy. And we were talking, he's like, oh, you're going to talk to Richard Garfield, you're going to do this interview with him. What are you going to talk to him about? And I'm like, well, I'm going to talk about this idea, right? Like, what are our lives like, right? If Richard Garfield doesn't invent this game, what happens to it? Where are we? One of the things I just like, it's kind of amazing to me. He's like, I have thought about that a lot, actually. And he's like, I think if I never found Magic, he's like, I don't know what I'd have been. He's like, I think I'd just be a doctor. And I'm like, this is not a great argument, Ili. No one wants to hear how you would have been a pediatric oncologist if not for Magic.
Yeah. Absolutely. Not to mention the millions of people who maybe are inspired to do something like Magic adjacent because of Magic, like just
Pokemon,
high fantasy or
Yu-Gi-Oh,
or
Flesh and Blood, Hearthstone, right? All of these other, not that I don't think Flesh and Blood's a $1 billion franchise, but the other three are $1 billion franchises, multi-billion dollar franchises. They don't exist without Magic.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I think Richard or Dr. Garfield, like he's got to be up there in terms of like if there's an award for that or a Hall of Fame for like all time whatever, I think he's got to be in there.
Yeah,
he's got to be in there.
Yeah, that was by the way, that was such a great honor for me this past weekend to get to interview him.
Yeah, what was it like talking to him for Magic 30?
I've talked to. I've obviously known him for a long time, and I wouldn't say we're friends or anything, but we're friendly, and I think there's mutual respect there, right? I mean, just not representing something more than the relationship has been more than it is. But I was pretty honored that he trusted me to sort of conduct this. But it was really cool. He told us a lot. He told a lot of really interesting insights into some of those early decision processes, and he's a very modest person, and he's a very reserved private person. So it was interesting because, but he seemed really to appreciate it, and he was taken aback. He got a standing ovation, and I don't know that he expected that, which is crazy, right? Because of course he's going to get a standing ovation. It was super cool. It was really for me, like I said, a huge honor to be able to talk to him and thank him, right, for like this really joyful detour my life has taken for these last 30 years, right? Like this is not something I ever expected to be doing, right? Like, if you asked me, 30 years ago, where will you be in 30 years? And it's like, I'll probably be like some, comic book creator, or, maybe doing something in film or but, something very much in the entertainment space. and really did not expect to become a game designer and an event organizer and an on-air personality and someone social media person and all of these things that sort of happened. I don't think I expected any of that.
You never expected to be tagged by someone on Twitter that you should be in the Magic Hall of Fame. So there you go.
Yeah,
it's all surreal.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
So do you think Richard is surprised by what happened to Magic as of right now? Like, I imagine it must be just an outsized success story, but how does he feel about it?
He it's interesting. His philosophy about games is that a great game, like, I don't think he thought it would ever necessarily thought it would sell what it sold. But if you asked him 30 years from now, will people still be playing Magic? He definitely thought it would still be being played. Not the way it's being played right now. He never expected people to have access to every card, let alone play sets of every card. Right? He never expected people's access to the cards to be as immediate and as deep as it is, right? Like, certainly didn't anticipate, how quickly information would cascade around the game, right? So that, formats are just solved, right? Like,
this is something that I think we need to also put in perspective for people, right? Like, playing in the 90s, you did not know what cards your opponent had.
No.
Like, there was no way to know even the rarities of the cards. Like, and that was actually, I would argue that joy has kind of been lost, right? Because now, the spoilers of the cards come out 5 months before the thing comes out, and it's just like back then when I played my brother, we were playing for Annie, and we did not know what someone else's deck had, and we could win. I still remember playing a Demonic Attorney, I think from Revised Edition, people had no idea. That was not just the fact that people didn't sleeve their Black Lotus or whatever, but just you had no literal idea what decks your opponent had or what cards they had. It was wonderful back then, actually.
Yeah.
So
I talked about that first tournament we ran, and we did an interview with the winner at the end of it, and he got very emotional because his opponent was playing a copy of his deck. His opponent in the finals had played him at a local store, seen his deck, and copied it as close as he could.
Deconstructed it, right?
There's no real internet here to speak of at this point. There's no deck list. There's no... People didn't even... Could withhold.
You have to see the deck to know what the deck is.
And there was some stuff going on the Usenet group where people would start to post deck lists, but people would sometimes only post partial deck lists. Yeah. It was, and so this guy, he was playing a 60 card or maybe 62 card, who knows at that point, right? Mirror. And he felt it was really important to beat this guy because this guy had the temerity to copy his deck. He's he's trembling. He's tears in his eyes. This guy's playing my deck. And it's
like looking into the mirror.
We had no idea. Certainly no idea that decks would just become so fungible, right? Just so. You just copy this notepad file, drop it into Arena, and 2 wild cards, got it. All right, let me start playing with the World Champions deck right now.
It was. I'm sorry, I went on a huge tangent, but I was asking about Dr. Garfield and basically he expected people would still play the game, just it was as if it was Goldfish or whatever, a pastime, but not what it ended up becoming.
So I think if you look at the communities that have spun up around Cyberpunk or Netrunner, Netrunner is the game.
That was the other Deckmaster game.
But Netrunner is still played pretty actively, right? People, and more importantly, the Star Wars game from Decipher. So the Star Wars game from Decipher still has a world championship. There's no company really running it per se, right? There's a fan.
They're creating virtual cards. There's a players committee.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're on it.
So I'm sorry, this is a huge digression. I'll just cut in here.
Oh, please. I'm happy to switch roles here, James.
Star Wars CCG was my life in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
Like you have no idea. Like I played regionals. I went to my parents, I would get them to like fly with me to play in like regional tournaments in Canada. Like basically I peaked as a card game player in the 90s.
Nice.
Like when I got into Star Wars CCG Decipher. Like I did not play Magic in the 90s as much as I could have, simply because Star Wars CCG was my life. And so I got back into Star Wars CCG later on, found out about the players community. But sorry, that's a huge tangent. But like, I love Star Wars CCG, like just like you love Magic. That's just to like, you know.
But it's great because it contextualizes what I'm talking about. And what Richard described to me is what he thought Magic would be like in 30 years. Is he thought people would still have their collections of cards, might have some fan-made cards of some, you know, but people would still play, even if the game itself was not being supported by Wizards of the Coast, if Wizards of the Coast went out of business or what, you know, he had no idea, right? He's like, I don't know. I always thought this was a great game. I knew very early on from the voracious appetite of my playtesters and their desire to continue playing and to their, you know, how much time they would put in because they were having so much fun, that the game would be something people would play, right? That it would become, you know, $1 billion thing is sort of besides point. I think maybe even is slightly annoying to him.
Yeah.
You know, that you know, that it distracts
talk about
a little
unintended
bit.
consequences.
Yeah, it distracts a little bit from people just like playing the game and having access to cards. One of the things that you could tell has been a flag he's planted over the years with the game is trying to keep the game from becoming too much of a collectible, right? And making sure people had access to the game. Something that he fought for time and time again, right? To sort of make sure people had access to cards and to and so I think he definitely thought people would still be playing. I just don't think he realized how many different ways and how many adjacent avocations would exist around that avocation. You know what I mean? Like, altering cards and, it's crazy, right? It's just, there's so many different ways that you can inhabit the game. So.
Absolutely. It's like asking Steve Wozniak, like, do you think the iPhone could happen when he was like building the Mac in his garage, right? With Steve Jobs, like there's no way anyone would have known. Like, there's no way. And if you think you knew, you should probably have a time machine, or you're probably lying. Like, there's no way anyone knew this would happen.
Yeah.
And we see it in like his later works too, like whether it's like the board games. Actually, he did, I think, Robo Rally around the same time as Magic, right?
Robo Rally precedes Magic. So
exactly.
he was selling trying to sell Robo Rally to Wizards of the Coast, and it was too expensive to produce. So it was like, hey, can you come up with something that's cheaper? Maybe something with cards or whatever, a card game. And he had been working on a game called Wizard Duel with his friends, and Wizard Duel became Magic.
Yeah. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So, Brian, how did you get into coverage?
So, Neutral Ground, start that in 96, do that. We'd go to a handful of pro tours over the years. Ran a pretty famous tournament series at Neutral Ground called the Grudge Match, which was Neutral Ground players versus Your Move Games players in Boston, where we would each have a tournament series to produce a champion, and then those champions would go to a pro tour, play each other, and then there was bragging rights, and both tournaments would push a prize pool up into the middle, and then the winner of the two players would take that prize pool. And I was doing a lot of content around that. So I, really was pushing the envelope on, this is like in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. I don't remember exactly. But still, people would try to withhold deck lists when they played in events. They'd be like, I'm going to play in this event, but you can't publish my deck list. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing this for the deck lists, right? Like, I want people to come to my website, buy Magic cards. right?
Right.
So this is all about deck lists. So all my deck lists said, by playing in this tournament, you agree that your deck, if you don't want to be in the tournament, you can drop right now. But if you're playing in the tournament, your deck list is going to get published. Whether you win, lose, or draw, there's nothing you can do. Right?
Yep.
That's just how it is. You know, and people were like, well, I have the copyright on my deck list. No, you actually you actually do not. And so we were doing a lot of coverage around the events. We were doing like weekly metagame analysis, you know, doing breakdowns of how all the archetypes paired up against all the other archetypes. You know, we could tell you, you know, and when things changed at some point in after 9/11, honestly, there was a couple things happened. The store kind of went downhill in terms of people being willing to come into Manhattan from all over, right? People are like, yeah, you know, maybe I'll just go to my local store in Philadelphia, or maybe I'll go here, or, you know, like the idea of going through a bridge or, you know, over a bridge or under a tunnel was if you lived in New York, there was always like a clutch in your chest as you did that for a while.
Yeah, people had trauma.
Yeah, there was a lot of trauma and a lot of fear, and just being in the city wasn't always a pleasant thing, and you know, we were probably didn't move as fast to adapt to, you know, changes with like eBay and some other online stuff, and the store was not doing super well, and I was honestly not as passionate about it as I had been. Right, I'm like kind of like, oh, hey, this huge traumatic thing has happened. I'm, you know, I thought my parents had been, you know, they were down in Wall Street that day, and you know, I knew a bunch of people who worked down there, and I was like, oh my God, you know, I was very, very fortunate in terms of the people I knew. But, you know, it's one of those events in your life where you're like, what am I doing? And so
everything changed. Yeah, for sure.
And so I really wanted to be, I wanted to get back into comics, James. It's like
Full circle.
That's the arc of things for me, right? So I decided I was going to get back into comics and started pitching some stuff and working on some stuff with some friends, and was fortunate enough to sell a comic to Marvel Comics, create a title I created called The Craptacular B-Sides, that Marvel, you know, liked and wanted to do a mini-series around. There's these kind of like three hapless superheroes from New Jersey who really wanted to be superheroes but didn't quite know how. It has some magic. There's a character called Mize, who is a part of the Marvel Universe now because of the term Mize and magic. I was like, I loved that phrase. Like, that's absolutely cool. Like a teenage superhero name, right?
Sure.
And also got to write Captain America for an issue. And when I announced I was going to close Neutral or sell Neutral Ground and leave Neutral Ground and was turning it over to new ownership, I got almost instantly got an email from Aaron Forsythe, who was like, hey, you should come and do some writing for us. You should write we're starting a new website called, you know, Daily MTG. At the time, there was Sideboard. And you should... Yeah,
Sideboard Magazine, shout out. Yeah.
And, you know, I had been going to some PTs, and when I would bomb out of the PT, I would help out with the coverage team. Right? So, like, it's a couple of team PTs, I did some coverage, and it all sort of came together, and I got sent to, Grand Prix Bangkok and met Ben Sek. And, you know, sort of bring that full circle. That was my first event where I was just by myself at an event. And then started in like 2002 or 2000. Yeah, Chicago 2002 was my first Pro Tour doing coverage as a full-time member of the coverage team. And then just, you know, never looked back. I just kept doing that. I love traveling. I had never really traveled very much when I was younger. And so the opportunity to see all these different parts of the world, to travel to Japan, travel around Europe, travel to, Hong Kong and Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur and these places that, I wasn't necessarily, going to get a chance to go to, normally was phenomenal, right? And to meet people from all over the world and to make friends all over the world. But it was just so amazing to me. And so I started out, back then coverage was text. That's all it was, right? Like it was all text coverage. And so I could write pretty quickly. I had a lot of experience as a writer and as an editor, and turning things around on tight deadlines. And so I was pretty good at it. I think I brought a different voice and sensibility to text coverage at the time. Really pulled out some of the personalities of the players, and really let the players talk. I had an awkward situation where one of the first matches I covered, I covered a match between Darwin Castle and Bob Maher, and they were going at it. They were really didn't like each other, and I captured all of that.
You mean they were just yapping? And
Bob thought Darwin was a cheater. Darwin thought Bob was a cheater. Was really what comes across if you read the coverage, right? It's from first round of Pro Tour Yokohama, right? They were basically accusing each other of playing with marked sleeves, right? Some amount of gamesmanship, some amount of, I think Bob really thought
trying to get the edge.
I think Bob thought Darwin had marked sleeves, and Darwin was like, "Well, if you're gonna get a sleeve check on me, I'm gonna get a sleeve check on you," and it was really heated. And it was a match Darwin did not play well, and you become a little more politic as you do coverage later on. But I was not very politic at all in this one.
What did you do?
I just said he played like he didn't know what the cards did or whatever, right? Or he was, it was obvious. I don't remember.
You mean you wrote that, or
I wrote that? I wrote it. Okay. I just wrote that he just kind of could have won the game 10 turns earlier, and whatever. I didn't know, and and Magic was meaner back then, so I just assumed everyone had thick skin. I don't know how to explain it, and then nothing came of it. I was like, oh man, maybe I was too far. 15 years later, Darwin comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, I just read that coverage from Grand Prix from Pro Tour Yokohama." That was pretty mean.
He had not read it
until recently, and then he got mad at me.
Until over a decade.
Yeah.
Oh my!
And he's like, maybe you didn't understand. I'm like, okay, that's definitely what happened. I didn't understand.
Wait, did he try to explain to you what?
He tried to make it be like,
win the game?
I mean, Darwin has a very, Darwin thinks he's very good at Magic, and he is. He's a Hall of Famer, and I'm not. So I think he looked at our relative positions there and drew some conclusions that were probably not true. But in hindsight, I would never have written the article the way I wrote it later on. As my career, I would have been much more circumspect.
What happened? Was it just experience mellowing out? How did you end up
just realizing that you're talking about people, realizing how it's not sports reporting. Also, it's not like these are just people that you're going to be on the bus with, going to the event, and and just people and you start to realize how much goes into it and how hard it is to be good at Magic consistently for any long period of time, and and how much you don't know, right? Also, right? There's maybe there's a really valid reason for the way the lines he took in that game, and I certainly wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for me to not know, not be aware.
Right.
So you become a little more, you just you do your first thing, you're like, I'm going to do something really I feel kind of bad about it now, but at the same time, it's a funny story. Just really funny to me, the idea 13 years later, he read it and was like, hey.
Yeah. Now it's time to get bad. So in those early days or years, did you have partners that you did coverage with, or was it just a solo act?
So Grand Prix were almost always a solo act. They would just send you, and then you'd recruit a couple people. yeah, you recruit some people to maybe help you with the top 8 or do some stuff as they knocked out of events. But it was solo. And then when you were doing a PT, there was a coverage team. But, again, it was go do your round, go type, go take notes and watch what's happening live. Now go back to your station, go write that up, and now tag in the other group of people to cover 2 feature matches or write some metagame feature or do something like that. So it was pretty solo, but I would be remiss if I did not mention Toby Wachter. Toby Wachter is someone who really is a big part of dragging me into coverage. Toby was someone who used to play at Neutral Ground. He's someone I still consider a very close friend. But at the time, he was like a wonderkind going around the world doing Magic coverage before I was ever doing that. And he was just like, come on, you should do this. You'll love it. It's fun. And so he's someone that I, while you didn't have a partner, right? He's someone that I associate very closely with that. And the other person is Josh Bennett. Josh Bennett is, to me, one of the greatest coverage reporters of all time. And someone who I was really nervous about meeting, right? I was a little I was reading his coverage, while I was doing stuff. When I got to the Pro Tour, and I think it was Pro Tour Venice, maybe was the first time we worked together. Actually, no, the first time I met him was at Pro Tour New York in 2001. And I was like, oh my God, that's Josh. I don't know if he's like BDM. And we were just like fast friends, like immediately, which is awesome. Right. It's one of those great things. But, and so Josh is someone else I associate very closely with those early days of text coverage. So
what was something that you absorbed or learned from your predecessors or things?
Well, it's really hard. Josh is such a unique animal and has such a unique approach to writing that it's hard to emulate what he does. He's so good.
Just very unique.
Very unique.
Yeah.
Toby just really, like, I would say the big thing, and which is not to say Toby's not great. Toby's a super talented writer. Josh just is perpendicular to all of us. He's just got a different mentality about how to do things that leads to some really unique content. But Toby, really just kind of showed me the ropes of it, right? Like, and what you have to do, and what's sort of really laid the blueprint out for what coverage would look like. Toby is someone, by the way, when you talk about a Hall of Fame, and you talk about coverage content, to me, Toby and Josh are 2 people, and Kim Ikefet, who did a lot of early text PT coverage, and Andy Collins, and Monty Ashley, who, really are all people who pioneered what coverage would be, and really templated it for people. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's what I got.
No, I mean, it does make me realize that you have a really good memory for, it's just like how, sometimes I can't remember what I had for dinner yesterday, but I can remember all the games I played, like, of Magic or Star Wars, like, back in the day. It's just like we have this kind of memory, right?
Yeah, I used to have such a good memory, James. I do not anymore. My memory used to be like if I could have played Magic when I was 15, I think I could have, gone toe to toe with anybody. Like my processing speed and my memory for things and my ability
that was the peak.
Absorb information, and it's steadily downhill.
And plus, back then you were surrounded by such excellent players as well. So it's like it's hard for that not to rub off, right? If you're in that culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, of all the places that you visited as part of doing coverage, is there one that stands out as being particularly memorable Like, is there one that you would pick out from like in terms of like people or events, or like it's like very hard to forget?
I think that the two spots that really stand out for me are Paris and Honolulu. And part of that is because a big part of the coverage is like pretty lonely, right? Like you do coverage, like it's great. Like you're there with your friends, you're in this incredible bubble of people who are all kind of like-minded with you, but you're also in this city and you don't get to do very much, right? And you work these really long days, and you're up at 8 a.m. And making your way to the tournament site, and you see the local Starbucks, and you go into the convention center, and you buy some, like, whatever the hot dog is of that country, you know what I mean? Like, whatever, like, just crappy convention hall food that is universal to the world. And you get done at, like, 9 o'clock at night, and, maybe you do a draft in the lobby with your friends, but really you're exhausted, and you do that all over again.
Yeah.
And so it can be a little like, oh, I'm in wherever, and I didn't do anything. And so for me, Paris and Honolulu are two trips where my wife came out, either for the entire trip or showed up at some point during the back days of the Pro Tour, and then stayed in the city for another week, with her. And so, it's not something we got to do a ton over the years because, there were so many events. And often you were like, oh, I'm done. I'm going to come home, clean my laundry, and then I got to go because I got to go to Kansas City. And then from Kansas City, I got to go to Vancouver. And then from Vancouver, I got to go to Santiago. And, and that was kind of like the grind. But those two cities are cities where I really got to carve out some time, and we had some really special memories and some really great moments there. And I'm very warm towards Magic for giving me that opportunity for that. You know,
because you made it a proper vacation.
Yeah, that vacation
with your partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because my mental image of you or someone doing coverage is just like, I don't know if you watched the George Clooney movie Up in the Air, but it's like that's basically like you just get drop shipped into situations, and then you're just on to the next.
I think every coverage person had like a little PTSD watching that movie. I do, especially from like that back in the day where it was a really small team of people doing everything. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any particular events from a coverage perspective that just really stand out for you, just in terms of being there?
Let's see. There are definitely.
You're part of so many iconic moments, so I guess it's kind of unfair to ask for.
No, it's. So a lot of them are going to be involving players that I know, right? So, seeing Jon win his first Pro Tour in New York.
Jon Finkel, obviously.
Yeah, Hall of Famer. Jon Finkel, someone I've known since he was a kid. Seeing him win his first Pro Tour, and sort of like come of age. I can't explain it, right? Like so there was like a bunch of different teams in the New York area, right? And there was like the East Coast Assassins, which is like this Jersey group of players that Jon came up with, who were super talented players, but kind of have that kind of like when you think of the stereotypical, bad experience of going to a Magic tournament, some of these players are going to be the players who are at the heart of that. David Bachman was one of those players who's just really could really be pretty mean. And he and Jon knew
I guess
each
the
other.
most polite way to say it is abrasive. Yeah.
Abrasive. And he and Jon knew each other. They grew up together. They were on the same team. But Jon was kind of, to some extent, felt like bullied by Bachman. And they're both in the top 8. And Jon beat David, which was kind of great. And after the event, also kind of just wrote this great tournament report, which just talks about like, oh, wait a minute. I don't really have to subject myself to this. I can, and really makes this break from that team and that culture and goes and joins Team Dead Guy, which is, really, I think of it as sort of the birth of modern John. A more adult,
right?
More,
and that probably doesn't happen
person.
unless he wins that event. That doesn't happen
to some extent.
Kind of a sliding doors moment.
Certainly gave him the platform to talk about it. To me, it's a really great tournament report. It's like one of those things. The first time you read something by someone, you're like, I didn't know John could write, right? And he wrote this really, really great tournament report. I think it was on the dojo. Probably can still find it if you dig a little bit, but.
So that really stands out because of you knowing him and that personal association.
Yeah, and just sort of like that battle between sort of the light and dark forces.
Light and dark side.
And not that, I like David, and, but I mean, he was just like, I definitely, as a tournament organizer, and there's a lot of players from that era who were in that crowd who've all grown up to be fabulous human beings, right? David, unfortunately, not with us anymore. He passed away a couple of years ago. And didn't really know him, but most of his contemporaries from that group were all just, great people now. And but David was certainly someone who was had an antagonism with John that, certainly, just it felt good when John won that event, and and it was a vindication too, because John had just been so consistently just making the top 16 of tournaments and had a bunch of top 8s but hadn't won. And a win is so hard. It is not, the measure of an excellent Magic player is consistently making top 16.
Of course,
top 8s.
Consistent placings is key.
The win is pretty volatile event, right? Like there's lots of things that can happen. But to see him get it was great, right? It felt like a big vindication for him.
I mean, you have such a wide perspective on things. Like, in your opinion, is John the greatest ever?
So I really do think that the greatest ever is, depending on the sunlight, depending on the breeze.
Depending on what side of the bed you wake up on.
John, Kai, and Paulo all are, I think, just 3 of the best to ever play the game, and have, slightly different eras, slightly different circumstances, but are just all people who, if you had to find someone to play a game of Magic to save your life, you wouldn't feel bad with any of them. They're all just so good. But
so it's kind of a three-way tie.
But John, so that all said, John did it in the dark, right? John starts at Pro Tour 1. There is no real Magic internet. Kai is the first player that comes of age as a dojo baby, right? Like Kai, if you go through the old dojo archives, you can find posts from Kai where he posts his phone number and he's like, hey, if anybody in Germany wants to play test with me, here's my phone number. Right? Like,
this was early days.
This is early days. Like Kai is a dojo baby. So the dojo is like a major seismic shift. John just knew the game. He didn't read articles. He didn't, posit theory. He just understood it, right? Like if you ask John to describe why he made a certain play, he can't always do it. It's like it was the right play, because he doesn't even see, where someone who's more analytical about things might be, oh, but you could have done this or you could have done this. And John's like, well, why would I do those? I wouldn't. He doesn't even consider them, right? It's just like there's just one path.
There's that intuition that's just like you can't learn that.
Yeah, and so to my mind, I think all 3 players are just unbelievable. But I think the age in which John did it, the sort of fog of war surrounding the game that he dispelled to do it, I think I have to give the edge to John.
Right. I get you. The earlier era wins out. It's kind of like comparing Nate Archibald to Kyrie Irving. Like you can't. Like it's different periods of time, right?
Yeah.
But if you had to, which I did, I put you on the spot, then Jon wins the tiebreak because he was doing it in the dark.
Yeah. So, you know, and you can make the argument that he was then, you know, doing it against worse players in the dark. But then Jon, post his Hall of Fame induction, has like a whole other Hall of Fame career against, you know, younger, faster, you know, players who were not in the dark. So, Jon just is, you know, if Jon puts any intention behind him playing Magic, Jon's just going to be able to go out and win a Pro Tour.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm not going to offend you by saying this, but it's kind of like comparing BDM as a game designer versus Richard Garfield as a game designer. Like, okay, maybe you're doing something technically stronger now, but without the shoulders of giants, like you can't, like, you know what I mean, right?
Yes, absolutely. Richard did it in the dark, right? Richard just like, well, I don't know, what if? And then you tap these, and
what
then
if
you
it's a trading card game?
And what if that existed? So no, for sure. And I'm never going to be insulted by any comparison to Richard Garfield in any way. Right?
Yeah. So, what kept you doing coverage for so long? Because you know the way it you know, like you said, it could be lonely, it could be challenging. You've had lots of different jobs. Like, what was it that kept you in it?
So the camaraderie of it, right? Like the group of people. There was definitely a family. You know, I just spent a lot of time crying this past weekend, seeing people I haven't seen in a few years who are just like, you know, who I love. I mean, I love them. And people I was in the trenches with, you know, multiple times a month doing coverage. And that's just really compelling. Plus, I love Magic, right? And I love pushing things forward. Right, I loved figuring out new things we could do with coverage. Right, I loved deck techs was something that I really, I think.
You're part of
certainly
all
deck
of
techs
those.
existed in text form, but like in terms of like video deck techs, I think that was something that we really pioneered during Pro Tour coverage. You know, getting videos up on YouTube that were embedded in the front page, right? Like all these little things, and just eventually, you know, for 2 years pushing for coverage of the Swiss rounds of Pro Tours, and finally getting that, you know, I was like, oh, I want to be a part of that once we did that. You know, as
you wanted to see through these things. Sure.
And as we built out the team and brought more people on, and you know, it's like, oh, you know, I want to do other things, right? Like I never liked being, so the thing I liked the least about coverage was being in the booth, right? I enjoyed it, right? But it's the thing I liked the least, right? It's like really hard work. It's pretty unforgiving if you slip up at all. And it's not the things that I love about Magic, right? I'm not that person who can recall the details of the game 10 years later, right? Because I don't care. I don't care about I like the narrative. I do. I know there's like these hardcore Magic players go like, I hate narrative. You know, I just, you know, they just want to play the game and remember the details of the game and the decision tree. And that's not that interesting to me. What's interesting to me is that you are playing in your first event at this level, and how did you get here, and who are the people, you know this, James, this is the thing that motivates you, right? And so telling people stories became something that was really important for me. It was something that I did in my column for Wizards. And so I was really excited as I got to do sideline stuff, as I got to do the reporting and the interviewing, and, you know, going into the tournament a few days early and going to some playtesting house and getting to hang out with the players and tell their stories and sort of set the stage for what was going to happen in the coming week. And that was all the stuff that I really loved, right? Like that like just connecting players with the people at home.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that human aspect, the stories aspect, is definitely the number one thing. And as you alluded to, that's basically why I'm doing any kind of Magic content now, is like it's all about the people, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Like Magic for me is not really about problem solving, or it's not about just like playing as perfectly as possible. it's about all the growth, because like you see people grow and have jobs and have lives and have friendships because of Magic, but I guess anyone listening to this would probably feel similarly.
Right.
So were there any particularly memorable moments for you in terms of like just talking to the winners or like interviewing somebody in particular?
Interviewing Autumn Burchett.
Again, also an unfair question. You probably interviewed like hundreds, thousands
absolutely,
of people.
but I can tell you a couple that really were meaningful for me. Autumn Burchett, that was my last event before I retired from the coverage team. And that was just such a history-making win. Really this champion for this new vanguard, new vanguard of Magic players, who are coming into the game and were creating a space for themselves. And it was so exciting to see, and to see such a dominating performance from them was just amazing. And someone I had known, and one of the things that I loved about the sort of different spots that I occupied in the game is I would meet so many players on the way up through my column. So, I would always do features about the players who finished 9th through 16th at Pro Tours, and would do features about players who had like great runs in one format or another, but maybe didn't make the top 8. And so Autumn Burchett is someone I interviewed after their first Pro Tour. And, would always see Autumn coming to these events. Oh, how's it going? Oh, and followed the struggle sort of like of someone trying to stay qualified and coming back to these events. And then, for my last event, for that, to see that run and to be able to do that as my last interview and to sort of, see that the game was continuing to grow and be a bigger and bigger and bigger tent for more and more people was phenomenal. There's a great interview I did with Steve Rubin after he won. And one of the things I think people make a mistake often about when they do interviews is they want to focus on the mistake of the player made, right? Like I remember someone, doing some GP winner interview. They're like, the first question is, so in game 3, you cracked the wrong fetch line, right? It's like, dude.
When you punted, what did it feel like?
What are you doing? And so I really try to, especially in a winner's interview, right? There's a context, there's a time for that, but not. And I was interviewing Steve Rubin after his win, and we were talking, and he said something which acknowledged the mistake he made. It was something that people had talked about, during the top 8. And I was like, okay, well, let's stop there for a second. Let me ask you something. You made this mistake. How did you, overcome that? Like, what do you do? Like, I'd just be more like, I've made a mistake on camera, and there were 6 people watching, me playing in some $5,000 tournament, and I like wilted and I died, like, what do you do? And he's like, oh, and he's like, so here's my mentality. And he talks about how he dealt with mistakes, which was that he gives himself one mistake. He's like, I'm just going to make a mistake. I know I am. And it's just such a great answer. And it was so mature. And I was like, oh, Steve Rubin's awesome. Right. And he he just had thought about it. And it was something that I felt good about as an interviewer. Also because I've made the mistake of maybe asking a question that was too, that it wasn't the right time or felt forced into the, but it was like, oh, sitting back, listening to what the player was talking about and realizing there was a window to talk about that. It was a great moment. And interviewing Calcano when he made his top 8, Chris is someone that I've known. I was one of the people.
He works so hard.
Chris is someone I've known since, before he was a Magic player. He would come to Neutral Ground and he played Versus System. And he was a really good Versus System player. And he played Yu-Gi-Oh! And played some other games. And it's like, man, Chris, you're just really good at all these games. You should be playing Magic. And I wasn't the only person who said that to him by each time. I'm not taking credit for Chris's career. And so I've known him forever. And just grinding and grinding and grinding. And we weren't going to do an interview that round. Like, we were off. And I'm like, and I saw Calcano, and I'm like, we have to do this interview. Like I have to
capture that.
I have to capture that. I have to talk to him. I have to express to him how much this means to me too, right? Just as someone who's and it was a great moment, and I'm really happy I got to be there and do that and share that with him, and see all the people who loved him so much, who were on his team supporting him. Great moment. And of course, my most famous interview moment was that same event. I get reminded all the time, which is the Martin Mueller interview.
Maybe you should recount it for those who may not be familiar.
So I'm interviewing Martin Mueller, and again, it's that same sort of question about like, how do you recover from a mistake? I don't remember if he had already made top 8, or I think he had just made top 8, but we were talking about like something, and he's like, how do you recover? What do you do? And he's like, sometimes you're gonna fuck up when you play a game of Magic. We're doing this live, right? And I'm like, oh, and my eyes kind of like go like Marty Feldman size,
the BDM meme.
I was a meme for a while after that, and I'm like, okay. And so we keep talking, and he's like, but that's what happens. People fuck up, and I'm like, oh my god, what are you doing? And then he comes over the top, and he's like, but and I'll probably fuck up again, and.
That's trifecta, yeah.
And I'm like, and what I felt really good about, like, is I was able to get and I'm like, maybe even in this interview.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right. I don't remember doing that. I was like in a fog, but
yeah.
I was like, oh, that's great. And it's just a great
it's
moment.
It's a good improv moment.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
And Martin Mueller's someone I just, very serious, but a great player.
But I think that speaks to what you're able to do as an interviewer or as a coverage person, is that you could get people to really open up with you, right? Because, I mean, you could look at it as kind of a negative, like, he F'd on 3 times or whatever. But it's more about, like, they're really entrusting you to...
Mad. I was owed a curse word. I retired without ever cashing in my curse word on air. So, like, I have
you retire with a perfect record.
I have a foul mouth, right? Like, I curse all the time, and people were always trying to get me to do on-air stuff with Wizards, but I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I can not curse. No, like, tell you what, you get one curse. Coverage is PG-13. If you get one like Steve Rubin, you get one mistake. You get one curse.
Yeah.
And I never used
it.
And so I felt like Martin had burned that on me. But I'm sorry, I stepped on your question there.
No. There's not really much of a question. It's just I think it's just good that it's just a comment that I think that is part of being a good interviewer. Is people often forget that is like you just want to make people feel comfortable, and you want to do more listening than like just trying to project yourself. And I think that's like super important. And I really like your Steve Rubin example as well, because it's just like for someone who listened to that. That's a very instructive moment as well,
right.
Because like it's very much like, because oftentimes in winners interviews you're just like, yeah, it's great to win, of course it is, and like they're just elated or they're exhilarated, right? But that becomes a moment that becomes kind of like a teachable moment, because like if someone actually internalized that,
right,
they would see, even for the top level or the upper tier of Magic players, number one, they make mistakes, they're human, right? Because we're all human. Number two, like, it's not whether you made the mistake, but it's like, how do you process that?
Yeah.
Because like some people, they make that mistake and they just can't recover. And I think that mental aspect of the game is just so huge. And for him to actually, say that in a very constructive way and not be tilted by your tactful mention of it or hinting at it, like that's what it should be, right?
Yeah, you get to look under his hood, right? You're able
to look under his hood. You're able to draw that out as an interviewer, and that's kind of like an art. That's just great. Yeah. So
no, I enjoyed that. And like I said, you cultivate these relationships with players from the time they qualify for the I think in a unique spot, right, where I was interviewing PTQ winners for my column, and I would do go to playtest houses, and so you got to meet a lot of players at various points along the way. And part of what you do, or certainly part of what I would do, was also felt like I was preparing them for those. The thing is, if you're going to be a successful Magic player, you're going to need to talk about Magic on camera at some point, right? And so it was also one of those things where we would develop this rapport, and we would have this, and we'd be able to go back to these kind of familiar places to draw that conversation out from. Brad Nelson, to me, is that perfect example. I've had some great interviews with Brad over the year. You know, I think if you've ever seen an interview with me and Brad, there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of respect and a lot of fun in those interviews. And we're really like, you know, kind of like leaning into each other and kind of like laughing. And that comes from doing an interview, doing an article about Brad before his first event. He was some online person, FF Freak, who kept winning all these block construct events leading into the Pro Tour. And I was writing the article like on my way to the airport, right? And I was looking at the deck results, and I'm like, I don't know who this guy is, but if he's qualified for the event, watch out for this guy at the Pro Tour, because this person is clearly insane. Now, he was an online personality, a Magic Online person. I didn't know him, so I got a little bit castigated for that. But, you know, we did find out because of that at the same time. Like, yep, not only is he qualified for the PT, but he's going to be at the GP the weekend before. So we got to, like, interact with him at the GP, put him in a feature match, talk to him a little bit on camera, do all of that stuff and get him ready. He did a round one feature match at the Pro Tour against Luis Scott Vargas, which was crazy. Okay. And that's the situation where, and Brad's told the story a million times, he's so nervous doing the event that he cracks one of his cards. He's got like a Forbidden Orchard in his deck, and he like shuffles and something, and it's marked. Right? He like crimps the corner, and he's like, "What am I going to do?" And he's panicking. Right? You know, like you do. It's his first Pro Tour, his first match. He's playing against Luis Scott Vargas, and I'm like, "Hang on!" And I had just done a draft the night before or whatever, and someone had just handed me my rares from the draft for my team, and I happened to have a Forbidden Orchard in my pocket.
Right.
And I'm like, "Here, trade me.
Replacement.
Trade me."
Yeah.
And and I put it in my pocket, and he played the match and went on. He ends up finishing 9th in that event, right, or something like that. We do a deck tech at the end of day 1, at the end of day 2, and he's like, I'm not really comfortable. Can you imagine this, Brad Nelson? I'm not comfortable being on camera. I wasn't comfortable being on camera.
This is before Brad Nelson became Brad Nelson.
Yeah. And I was like, look, man, this is, if you're going to be good at Magic, which you are, you're going to need to be making videos, and you're going to need to be writing articles, and before you know it, this will be how you support your Magic hobby, right? Like this will be how you keep yourself playing the game. And he trusted me, I think, and we did a pretty nice deck tech. But that was the foundation also for a lot of great interviews over the years. So anyway, years later, he comes and goes from the game, comes back to the game, and starts succeeding. And he's like, "Hey, man, do you still have that Forbidden Orchard?" I'm like, "I do, actually. Right? I have it in this box of cards that are memorable to me."
The cracked one, right?
Yeah, the cracked one.
Yeah.
He's like, I would love to get it back as like a memento for my first Pro Tour. I'm like, no. He's like, what? I'm like, no. And he's like, why not? I'm like, make another PT top 8 and I'll trade it to you.
Oh.
And and he was like, you dick. He's like, I'm never going to make the top 8 of a PT again. And I'm like, sure you will. I'm not saying I motivate right now, but he did. Obviously made a couple and became one of the best players in the game again. And then he traded me a foil Splendid Reclamation from whatever Pro Tour he had top 8'd from one of his drafts. I'm like, let me go through your draft cards. And he had a foil. And
make it a proper trade.
And make it a proper trade. And a foil Splendid, and a card that I was going to be playing in multiple decks in Commander, and a card that, things that I love doing, right? Moving cards from zone to zone. And so we traded, and now he has that card framed in his workplace. I have it in my, I have the Splendid Reclamation in my CDC deck. So great. It was a great, one of those great things that I Brad is someone that, I adore, Really, really happy to know him, and really fun to watch the arc of his career.
Yeah,
really almost.
There's something about that, which is like you're able to directly and indirectly like just help the evolution of players, because it's like sometimes it's like what you say when the cameras are not rolling, that's actually the thing that helps him, right? Because like just telling him like just don't get nervous on the deck tech, because you're gonna have to do this a gazillion times, because if you're a high level Magic player, you're gonna have to do that. Like that's just like good advice.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the term metagame. And I think when we think about metagame, we think about this idea of this information like atmosphere that travels around the game. But I think the metagame really might be bigger than that. I think the metagame is all the things we've alluded to in this interview. Like all the sort of like ancillary things you can do around the game, all the different kind of content you need to create, the way that you need to inhabit the game. It'd be great if you could just like inhabit the game and be like tunnel visioned in and never have to think about being interviewed or doing a deck tech or writing an article or, what your top 8 photo might look like or any of that stuff. But you know what? All of that, the game is all of that, right? Like that's all sort of. And so I've been thinking about metagame, and this is something that Richard had said to me, and I don't even remember what it was, but we were talking about metagames, and it's really stuck with me, like the concept, and just realizing that Magic, exists in this huge metagame that is everything from cosplaying to judging to performing to educating, right, and nurturing. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Random thought.
Like it's bigger than just the decks. Like you got to think bigger. Like I guess another term would be ecosystem or like even industry. Like we said, like it's bigger than just the physical cards or the virtual cards, right?
Yeah. I mean, ecosystem becomes a little like transactional, so it's almost
business-like,
but so like maybe there's a better term than metagame, but that's
it's the bigger than a game sort of idea. Yeah. So other than Brad, are there people that you've witnessed or seen that have like had like incredible transformations over the years? Like is Brad the biggest one, or are there others that?
No, I mean
Brad's
transformation is really just a matter of refinement, right? Like that's just him becoming comfortable with being on camera. I think that's pretty traditional. I don't know. I think Magic has just sharpened people. I don't know that there's any real transformations that happen. I think there's like it's a great way for people to find their power, right? To find their sort of their voice, to find their to find what they don't know and that they need to learn. And so I don't know. I'm not sure that there is really like any kind of great transformation so much as like a refinement or an evolution that people go through.
Sure. Or maybe a calling, like people are who they are, but then Magic is a way that a vehicle, they find their calling or some sort of deeper meaning, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. So just kind of switching gears to the present day.
Sure.
How do you feel about like Magic coverage now, or just the things that you were involved in the past? I know this is a very general question. Maybe we can start with coverage. Like, where do you think coverage needs to go? Where do you think it needs to evolve? And like, are things going on the right path? I know the MPL thing is now abolished and we're going into something new, and which is still sort of like TBD, to be honest.
Right.
But how do you feel about that stuff?
I think I think if you look at the coverage from Worlds this weekend, it was great, right? I think there was a lot of stuff that they really tightened up. Did a lot of pre-production on the draft segment of the event, so that they were able to show you the draft in this really kind of like quick form.
Historically, the draft is just super hard to cover.
And cut right from the draft to play, right? Because they did a lot of that content drafting the day before and stuff like that. I thought that the coverage of the event, like really it's just a function of putting some great voices in there, which they have. The team that was there was fantastic. But really, it's about having the resources to go up against these really glitzy esports projects. Being willing to commit the resources to make the game look great. I thought the stuff from Worlds looked great. I'm really optimistic about the Pro Tour in Philadelphia, but I have no idea. I don't think anyone still has any idea. I'm sure someone at Wizards has an idea, but I don't think anybody on the coverage side has any idea what that means, what that's going to look like, what that'll be. And you really want to hope. I really hope that Wizards puts the same kind of resources towards this. And the other thing I really hope that happens for coverage is I really do want to see the Hall of Fame come back. Right? We've had multi-year hiatus since Reed Duke was inducted. There's a number of players who are still sort of like, either we're coming onto the ballot or we're sort of consolidating their base in terms of the voters that we're moving towards getting inducted. And, even if the rewards might not be the same for that, I would like to see that continue. And would love to see Richard get inducted into the Hall of Fame, whether it's the Pro Tour Hall of Fame or the Magic Hall of Fame. Doesn't really matter. Like we said, none of it exists without him. Would really love to see that. But I gotta tell you, if you watched any of the footage, I don't know how much I think maybe the videos will be available on demand by the time this airs. But the game nights content from Magic 30 was unbelievable. Really, really sets a high bar for Magic content. Really interesting to see. Also, I think probably one of the best examples now of what like Commander coverage or Commander content could look like. And I think you're going to see some people definitely being like, well, what do I want to watch? Do I want to watch people playing Magic at the highest level, or do I want to watch people playing Magic and having fun? Right? And that's always been the struggle for Magic coverage is it never looks fun. You know what I mean? Like when players are playing at that level, it's very serious. It's one of the things I really, really liked about watching people play at home during the pandemic. I really enjoyed watching coverage because people's faces were more like, you'd see people like doing this, and you'd see people like laughing at like their board state, or people were much more relaxed. They didn't have their game face on at all times. And I really liked that. But I do think that the energy that you see in the game nights footage from Magic 30 is going to be a real challenge. When you're committing resources for how you're going to spend your money, it's hard for me to imagine that that kind of content won't be drawing resources away from some other kinds of like high profile coverage. But I've been wrong before, so we'll see. But that's
always the tension, right, Brian?
Yeah.
It's always the tension of like, are you watching Magic to be entertained, or are you watching Magic to be entertained / escape? Or are you watching Magic to learn and to play at a high level?
Right.
Like, I think in recent years that's become more of a, dare I say, divide, because the content itself has shifted more towards the former, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's just super cool stuff. They put on a show, right? It was almost like an improv in some ways, right? Like they were having a lot of fun. There was, I forget his last name, Jacob, who's on Cobra Kai, guy who plays Hawk, was there playing, in the mat, right? It was just like, it was cool.
Yeah.
Right? It made Magic look like something you wanted to do, like something you want to tell your friends about. And it's hard to get into what's so compelling about two people staring at each other. Like, I love it, right? I am not slagging off on high level Magic coverage. I love it. I consume it.
You would be the last person.
I will watch it, for 12 hours a day for 3 days during a Pro Tour, right? One of the things that's been cool about, not being retired is being able to watch some of this stuff and, really loving it. But it is much like Magic, there's a steep learning curve on it. So, Anyway.
That's always been tough. Like, I think there's a sort of analog to something like chess, where I think now when you watch chess, which is streamed a lot, or there's a lot of things that, like, I think also people that play chess, the streamers, like, they have to become more personable, right? And I think there needs to be, I think there already is kind of an evolution now where it's like the highest level players need to be able to entertain. Like, it's just a world we're going into now, which is like, you have to be more of a generalist. You can't just do one thing super well. You have to do like a whole bunch of things well, which in a way is kind of antithetical to like having extreme focus on being the best Magic player. But it is what it is, right? The world is just sort of evolving.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's very interesting too, because if you watch, you're seeing a lot of, pro and former pro Magic players making that move over to Commander content.
Yes.
Right.
I think Brad Nelson is playing Commander.
Brad Nelson's playing Commander. Brian Kibler, doing Commander
Yep.
content. I think you'll see more. And it's a great vehicle to tell stories about the game too, right? Because you can, as someone, that's what I express myself through my Commander decks, right? I'm like, oh, I loved this deck. My Estra deck is just an expression of Gabriel Nassif's deck from Yokohama, which was one of the first events. First time I got to travel to Japan and do coverage, and I sat down and I covered this deck, and I was like, "What does this deck do?" And oh my god, this deck is awesome, right? And the deck is probably slightly too broken for Commander, but I don't care, because to take any part of that out is to not be doing the thing that that
almost like not paying tribute to that thing.
Yeah. My Sidisi deck is the spider spawning deck, and I think it's a great medium to tell stories through deck building. I think you don't. I mean, I know there's a ton of people who look at Commander and they want it to be super tight, and they're like, EDHREC says that you use this card and you do this. And it's like, no, man, just play with the cards you like, and you got a little bit of room. You can be a little bit loose here for the sake of having a good time. One of the things I worry about sometimes about Commander is that it becomes too that it becomes a little too homogenized and a little too optimized through like everything else in Magic, right? Through more attention, then people are like, well, why would you ever play with this card? You're 5% more likely to lose if you use this as opposed to this.
That's really interesting, because like Commander has this like competitive EDH or CEDH thing come up as well, and because of sites like EDHREC and Moxfield, like there's that net decking thing that we used to see with competitive 60 card decks, like that's now happening for Commander as well. And it's just so, I wonder if you can also speak, the question here is, I wonder if you can speak to like how you feel, if there's some sort of like, because there's this common saying, right, Brian? There's this common saying like, Twitter is not real, like Magic Twitter is not real, like Reddit is not real. Like compared to the average person who plays Magic at the LGS and only buys like 2 packs a month or whatever, right? Like there's still that sort of like the online hyper information, like everything at your fingertips. The Sidisi deck is like, this should be the 99th card, right? Because it's like it's fine tuned versus just like playing Magic casually. Like do you see that divide? Like, or because like there's often this generalization that like the internet Magic is not Magic because like there's no hidden information, right? So I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
I do sort of like, I mean, my CDC deck is far from optimized, right? Like I'm playing there's cards I'm playing in the deck that I need to play to sort of create the sense memory that I want to have while I play it, right? I need to play Runic Repetition. I need to play Memory's Journey. I need to play Gnaw to the Bone. I need to play Mulch, right? I mean, they're good cards. They're fine cards, right? And I've actually used each of them to win games in some unusual way at some point with the deck. It's interesting, right? This is maybe a little bit of a digression. I sit down to play a game of Commander at Magic 30, right? And it's just like, I don't know, am I competitive? Am I casual? I don't know where I fit. I'm certainly not playing like this hyper-competitive Commander deck. I have some really good cards in my deck. My deck, given a little bit of room to operate, is probably just going to go and do something really stupid to you. right? But it's not optimized, and it's not going to do it on turn 1 ever, right, or turn 2 or whatever. And so it's not competitive and it's not casual, right? So I don't know what it is. It's cards I like playing. Anyway, so we sit down, and some guy, they're like, "Oh, it's going to be a casual." So it's like, "Oh, we'll play casual." The guy's like, "Oh, okay, my deck's casual." His deck's casual. He sits down. He goes, "Underground Sea, Mana Crypt, Rhystic Study, go. Turn 1 on the play." Right? And so we're like, "What?" All right, we play. And he starts doing all this stuff. I was like, "What are you doing?" Like, I thought that's fine, right? Like, I think we can beat you, right? But like, you're saying your deck's casual. And he's like, "I play it casually. That's what I mean." He's like, I could have force of willed like the last 2 spells that you people played, but I didn't because it's casual. Like,
right.
What?
Right. That's the good and bad of Magic. Is like everyone has such a different definition of what everything is, and the internet also forces us to kind of put a framework or label things, which is like because it can be challenging. Yeah.
I also hate the word casual, by the way, because I think casual implies a lack of passion somehow, right? To me, casual is
sort of like lackadaisical.
Yeah, I mean it's casual. I think there's 99 cards in this deck. It's a casual deck, right? I'm not sleeving it. It's casual.
Right.
I don't know. Like I do prefer social, right? Social and competitive as the sort of standards. But yeah, it's really interesting to watch people sort of struggle to figure. I think it should just be like anything else. You play things you love. Play with the cards that sort of speak to you and evoke an experience for you. Like if you're playing Commander, I don't understand. Playing. So I did something with Sheldon and the Professor for Shuffle Up and Play for his video series, where we played some Commander games of a format I call pre-DH, which is basically old school for Commander. So it's just you could only play with cards up until the last sets before Commander sets were released. So it's like I think M11 and New Phyrexia are the last sets. It's like EDH old school. But Professor, he gets very anxious about like cards and how people play, and he's like, so what are the things your deck does, right? And you tell him, and he's like, oh, Karn, you can't play with Karn, why not? And he's like, sub games, that's gonna take too long. I'm like, no, I mean you can just concede, right? Like I'm probably gonna win if I start sub games, but I like this card. And he's like, no, and then he's like, talking about Brine Elemental and Vesuvian Shapeshifter, which is the Pickles Lock, and 2 cards that I love, right? And I'm never not going to play with them, and they were in my first Commander deck, and they're always going to be in my Commander deck, no matter how much unfun it could be for people. And he's like, but that's not fun. And I'm like, so why is it? And this is a real question I have about Commander and about the philosophy around Commander. Why is it that if I play these 2 cards, that I need to draw independently of each other, find a set situation on the board where I can deploy them both and unmorph them both to punish the table in such a way that the table can't untap, right? And you can continue playing and maybe play some untapped lands and try to break up my combo if you want, or you can concede up, he's got the table locked and he's going to win. Why is that worse than Sheldon playing Insurrection, taking everybody's creatures and attacking them with it, and then sacking them to greed or good? But why is it worse than some very expensive 1 card do this terrible thing to the table, right? Like
it's harder to set up, and it's all subjective, anyways. How you analyze the fun for you versus other people. Yeah, I mean, I hate to get on my horse as well, but like. That's the challenge that I have with Commander in general, because like I grew up a spiky competitive player where the only thing that matters to me is like I need to kill you. I need to get your life total to 0 or mail you out. That is it. I don't care how you do it. It's like Street Fighter. Like, if you beat me by spamming medium punch, like, I don't care. I'm going to find out how to beat that. Like, for me, meritocracy is just like, how do I win? Right?
Right.
There's something pure about that because the incentives are totally aligned. But with Rule 0 and all these kind of things, like, I have to win in this way, I can't win in that way.
Right.
Like, it's problematic, to say the least.
Yes.
Problematic.
Yeah. I do think, I think people are sort of dictating. Like, I was like, you can just scoop. It's fine. If I lock the table, you can just scoop. That's okay. I'm going to concede when Sheldon plays Insurrection. I'm not going to do the math and see if everyone's dead down to the exact. I just don't. Yeah, the game's over. You've played a card.
There's a part of me that's just like old man yelling at clouds because I just like for the
it's called
for the first 20
when
years.
It's Magic. It's old man yells at Cloudfin Raptor. Just so you know.
Cloudfin Raptor. Yes, that's me to a T. And like the first 20 years of playing CCGs, we never had these conversations. And you could say that I'm backwards or backwater. And but back in the day, like if you got your ass handed to you, you would just pick yourself up and figure out how to beat them.
Go back to the counter, buy a new card, come back.
Go back to the dojo, go back to the duelist, and figure out how to. Sometimes if you can't beat them, join them. Right, just play the best deck or whatever it is.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, I think it's a byproduct of sort of just the rapid proliferation of information around the game, right? You know, no one certainly wants to be playing, not the best deck. And then once people are playing the best deck and that becomes oppressive and it's like, well, why are you doing, it's like this weird cycle, right? Like, why aren't you playing this card in your deck? This card is clearly better than that card, right? It was like, I saw someone talking about that with the commander deck where it was like, a 4-mana, get 2 lands out of your deck, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the 4-mana, get 2 lands out of your deck, but you can also cycle it if you don't want to, right? Like I forget what the card. I don't have to know card names anymore. That's the best thing about not doing coverage. And I'm like, who cares? Maybe that person owned that card and not the other card. Maybe they like this card because they have some memories of like playing with it.
They have some affinity to it. They think it's fun.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't always have to be optimized to the version that cycles. So,
but I do have to say there is actually some pretty good discourse in the Commander community about that. Like you shouldn't have to feel like you need to play the best version of that card because we're not robots and you should just enjoy. So I think that is something that I do like the Commander EDH community doing. And I'll share something else with you because I was recently editing my Brian Kibler interview and I was asking him like, Brian, why are you playing Commander? Like you just told me that you're a Hall of Famer and you only play Magic to win, or did for like 80% of your professional life. You literally did that for a living for a while. You came back to Magic just to like get into the Hall of Fame and all this stuff, which is also speaks to why the Hall of Fame needs to come back. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So why do you play Commander, Brian? And he was just like, that's a different thing because like for him, Commander is like designing a game for other people. Like he's looking at it another level. Like when I build my deck, I'm actually designing it for a play experience with 3 other people. So I think there's also a flip side to the argument, which is like, it is no longer about me. It's about like, are we having a good time? And he also said he has some principles. For example, he says he'll never play tutors in Commander. So going to your comment about like, why are you not playing the most optimized build? He will go out of his way to not play the most optimized build because he wants the experience to be unique and fun every time. So he's not going to be doing that. And I think the fact that Brian fucking Kibler has that philosophy about Commander should say a lot. Like you don't have to play the best version of the card in your deck, right?
I guess, but it's funny. The experience you can design for the other 3 players can be arch enemy.
And Kibler has said he's usually the arch enemy when he plays Commander because people are like, that's Brian Kibler, get him.
I've definitely.
He says that's also satisfying. He said to beat the other 3 players. So there's a part of that in him.
That was one of the reasons I would play Conspiracy at like conventions or events, and people were like, "Oh, do you love it?" I'm like, "No, I hate it." Because we sit down and play like some random Conspiracy pod. People are like, "We know him. Let's kill him."
Get him.
So.
And just call me old school, but back in the day, like if someone was doing something that you didn't like, you would just kill them next time. Like first, you just camp on them, and then they'll figure out like don't play stasis or winter orb, like because we're all just gonna kill James next time. Like it's very.
Was that you? Were you the stasis
self-balancing?
player, James?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I never was.
Okay.
I never was the grief, the miser player. Yeah. Is that griefer? Miser?
Griefer.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Griefer.
Yeah, griefer.
Yeah. No, I was always the good old like mid-range delver player. Like I wasn't gonna try to control you. I was just gonna try to get you to 0 as fast as I could. I guess I'm an aggro player at heart, but anyways, that's a whole other can of worms.
That's when you're on the Top 8 Magic podcast, right?
That's when yes. By the way, very seminal foundational thing. I've very much. I don't know how many hours of you and Flores I had in my year. Yeah, no, I mean, I think everybody from that period, because you guys were one of the original podcasts, really.
As far as I know, we were the first Magic podcast, but I mean, there may have been. I think we were the first.
Yeah,
because it was like what 2005, 2000. I
don't think any. I mean, Facebook wasn't even around.
Yeah,
barely around, let alone podcasts.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, Brian. I guess the last question is like, what's the best place for people to find you on the internet or on social, or where you would like to be found?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place to find me, for now, still is Twitter. I haven't, made up my mind about, what to do there.
Just don't tag BDM on. BDM should be in the Hall of Fame. Please, PSA.
I mean, it's just like it's always just a weird conversation, right? Don't like. Anytime you're going to have any kind of subjective conversation about like people and their merits of anything, don't tag them. Mm-hmm. But Twitter. So I'm at Top 8 Games on Twitter. That's generally the easiest place to find me. I don't really do that much else, right? I'm on Instagram, but it's Greedy M on Instagram, but it's mostly just photos of drinks. So I don't really do any Magic content there. I barely do any Magic content on Twitter, to be honest, right? I'm mostly talking about comics, games, drinking, food, TV. Let me ask you a question. I'm just curious, James. And I can never do an interview without interviewing the interviewer. So you talked about the Star Wars card game. Now, was it just the card game that drew you to that, or was it Star Wars? Is Star Wars something that's like wired into you? Are you like a Star Wars person?
Star Wars is something that was wired into me at a very young age. I had all the 90s era, like I think it was Hasbro or Kenner, like action figures.
Okay.
I had read all the novelizations like a good nerdy kid. Like I think I read like the Thrawn trilogy. I read like all the expanded universe
the Timothy Zahn stuff.
Timothy Zahn, exactly.
Yeah.
I read. I mean, I was a big Trek person as well.
Okay.
But Star Wars is definitely first. What's really funny is that that's definitely how I got into Star Wars. But I got really into the CCG because it was in a period of time, as you know, where there was not a lot of open information. So I felt like my Star Wars CCG career was a bit like playing Magic in the 90s. Like people didn't know anything about how to play Magic. Like if you actually knew what Temple was or how to build a deck or the actual degenerate strategies, because that was not a balanced game at all. It was pretty wild actually back then. Magic was wild too, because we had all these like crazy things that you read about. But the first time someone played Necropotence, right? Like what the heck is that? That was awarded the worst card in the set by Inquest magazine.
I remember the first time someone played it against me.
I was like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
But yeah, Star Wars was a lot like that. It was the Wild West. Nobody knew what was really happening except for like maybe 3 of us in the room. So I was very young and impressionable, and I really enjoyed being hyper competitive in that game. And that's how I got some success, playing. So I remember, okay, so just really random story. Like, there were basically 3 of us in Vancouver, Canada that were like any good at Star Wars CCG. And I think the 3 of us made top 8 at a regional tournament for Star Wars in Calgary. Like we actually all flew to Calgary, Canada, another province, to play. And I think my friend and I in Vancouver actually played each other in the finals because it was like that was how it was. It was like magic. Like if you knew what you were doing, because 99% of people didn't know what they were doing, it was just wonderful. I mean, the game was degenerate, it was broken, it was not balanced, but I had a lot of memories just being hyper competitive. And strangely enough, I am actually now sort of burned out of Star Wars. Like I actually didn't watch episode 9 for like a year after it came out.
Okay.
I didn't watch The Mandalorian until a year after it came out. It just got to the point with the new reboots and stuff that I'm just like, this is too much. Like now it's kind of my policy. I just don't watch things that people talk about in pop culture for like at least a year after it comes out because I just don't want to bother with it.
All right, well, I'm going to tell you, Andor is fucking great.
I have to watch Andor, huh?
Andor
okay.
I
got to get back in the saddle.
Andor is... I was just reading somewhere in an article, and they said, everyone was so busy trying to figure out if Rings of Power or House of the Dragon was the best show on TV right now, and it's really just Andor. It is.
Wow.
It is.
Okay.
It is like.
I sure did not hear that about Obi-Wan, which is, by the way, I have also not watched it.
You do not need to watch Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was not very good. Like it's just that it's got a lot of weird, like late season Game of Thrones logic about how people travel and move and like and everything's preordained. And even though some stuff's preordained in Andor because it's a prequel to Rogue One, it is so about the details. It's the most grounded piece of Star Wars fiction that we've seen.
Really?
Yeah, it's hard for me to describe. It really feels like, to me, and this may be not going to sound like a ringing endorsement for people, it almost feels like Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation. Or like it's just like these really like kind of like small moment, heavy details, people really having complex inner lives. It's it's fantastic. It's just unlike anything else you've seen. So the reason I was setting you up for that is I was curious if you'd seen it.
No, but it sounds like I'm missing out on something.
Yeah,
that I actually
it is
should,
something
because...
really different in the Star Wars experience. It's by Tony Gilroy.
I think that's what I need because
it's by Tony Gilroy who made Michael Clayton, and
oh really?
Yeah, so it's got that kind of like. Slow burn. It's wonderful. I think you will love it. So I'm glad I can introduce you to something that might cleanse your Star Wars palate. Yeah. No. I was just saying it just feels really
Tony
grounded.
Gilroy, right?
Yeah, Tony Gilroy, who made Michael Clayton. It just has this real slow burn quality. It is the lowest rated of all the Star Wars shows thus far. It is not found an audience. It is definitely, I don't know that there've been a lot of shots fired thus far through 9 episodes out of 12. I really adore it. And Diego Luna is just a fantastic actor who, everything he's been fabulous in, regardless of what language he's performing in.
Is he reprising the same character? I think he was in Rogue One, right?
He is, yeah. It's Cassian Andor. He's the eponymous character for the show, who is the person in Rogue One.
That sounds really intriguing because like I don't want to watch a Star Wars thing anymore where it's just like part of the regular style of Star Wars. Like I just want stories in the Star Wars universe, which is also why I really enjoyed season 1 of Mando before it became too expansive, because I wanted Mando to just be what it was, which is like a Western, right? A side story. But then but I think the problem with all these franchise things is that they have to become tentpoles of the larger universe. So I guess I have to enjoy Andor while it lasts. It sounds
this is almost deliberately not a tentpole, right? The characters who are here are not characters who show up later in the lore, other than Rogue One. But Rogue One has a pretty clear terminus in terms of where it goes in the lore, and it is very much what you're talking about there. It's like this has been like a heist film, a prison break story, espionage, film, everything but what you would think of as a normal swashbuckling Star Wars adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I'm sure it's turned off about like 3/4 of the people who, Star Wars appeals to. But I think if you're looking for something different, where you are in terms of your journey with the brand, I think it might be for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is honestly why I don't watch anything from Marvel anymore. I think the only superhero stuff I watched in the last, I want to say 3 or 5 years has been like Watchmen, which was incredible, honestly.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And probably the best show I watched in the last 5 years, if I'm being honest. And The Boys, because it's like it's like very unsuperhero-ish. Like I'm just so burned out of Marvel and Star Wars, but I think this is probably the one that I would check out because it's very un-Star Wars, which is what I need.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. 100% un-Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I just love it.
Yeah.
And I don't really love any of the other Star Wars TV content, right? Like I've liked some stuff. I liked Mandalorian, felt like it, but this is the one. This is my show in the Star Wars universe.
I want the slow, deliberate, slow burn Star Wars show. It sounds like this might be it. Yes. This is awesome. Thank you so much, BDM. Not only did I have a great interview due to you, not totally, and but also I got a really nice show recommendation. So I definitely would not have had Andor on my radar were it not for that. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me, James. This was great. Looking forward to seeing the episode when it airs. And and then hopefully find myself in Vancouver. You're not actually in Vancouver anymore, right? Like so.
No, I'm in China, but I'll be back on the West Coast in a little bit just to visit family. So who knows?
You said Vancouver, and I just was like, that's an excuse to eat at Miku. So
yeah. Yes, you do know the Vancouver eats. Yeah, I guess based on your travels. So,
Yeah. I was going into. There was one point where I was going to Canada to buy insulin. Right, it was cheaper to buy insulin in Canada.
Oh yeah, certain things
than it was to buy it with my insurance, and so I would travel, and so it was really easy. And I was like, I could just go up to Montreal, drive up with a friend, hang out for a day in Montreal. It's a pretty easy trip. And I'm like, or I could go to Vancouver and have lunch at Miku. That's how much I like Miku.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
well, I'll have to hit you up on some recommendations, I guess. You probably know more about Miku and Canadian eats than I do.
Miku is about it. That's all. Like if I'm in Vancouver, that's where I'm going to go. So.
All right. I will forever associate you with Miku in Vancouver. Have a great rest of the evening where you are, Brian.
You too. Thanks, James.